Section 1. The nuclear heart of Springfield: radiation, mutation, and the poison hiding in plain sight. There is a town in America where the fish have three eyes, where a man has survived being hit by cars, falling off cliffs, electrocuted, shot, crushed, launched from cannons, and caught in industrial explosions so many times that it stopped being remarkable somewhere around the 150th episode, where children have been the same age for 36 years, where a billionaire who personally remembers the Spanish-American War still shows up to work every morning inside a crumbling nuclear facility that a federal safety inspection once found to have 342 active violations, where the water glows faintly at night and nobody asks why. That town is Springfield. And the joke, the thing the show has been doing for 36 seasons straight, is that none of the people who live there seem to notice any of it. But we are going to notice, because once you sit down with the full catalog of what the Springfield nuclear power plant has actually done to that town, once you lay it all out side by side and look at it without blinking, you stop seeing a cartoon. You start seeing something that looks a lot more like a slow-motion disaster that the show has been documenting from its very first episode. The nuclear power plant is not a background detail in The Simpsons. It is not a convenient employer for Homer to stumble through. It is the engine of every single bizarre, impossible, medically improbable thing that has ever happened in Springfield. And the evidence for this is so overwhelming, so carefully embedded in 36 years of canonical episodes, that the real mystery is not whether it is true. The real mystery is why it took this long for anyone to say it out loud with the seriousness it deserves. Let us start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the show, but the beginning of the problem. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It sits on the edge of town. It dominates the skyline. Its cooling towers are visible from nearly every outdoor shot in the series. It provides electricity for the entire community of Springfield. And from the moment it appears on screen, it is described, depicted, and treated as one of the most catastrophically mismanaged industrial facilities ever constructed in the history of fiction. That is not an exaggeration. The show tells you this directly. In one of the most famous episodes in the series, a surprise safety inspection is conducted at the plant. The inspectors go through the facility from top to bottom, and they come back with a report. That report identifies 342 separate safety violations currently active inside the building. 342. Not 3, not 30. 342. The estimated cost to bring the plant into legal compliance was $56 million, and Mr. Burns, the man who owns the facility, who is a billionaire many times over and could have written that check before his morning tea, refused to pay it. The show tells you exactly why Burns refused. It was not because he was stretched financially. It was because addressing the violations would mean acknowledging they existed. And acknowledging they existed would mean someone might start pulling on that thread and asking how long they had existed, and what those violations had been leaking into the surrounding environment for the years or decades they had been active. So Burns chose to maintain the violations. And the violations are not minor paperwork errors. The show is specific about what they involve. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into local bodies of water. Radioactive waste being deposited onto children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. The cooling towers are cracked and have been patched with chewing gum at various points. The facility has luminous rats running through its lower levels, rats that glow in the dark, because they have been so thoroughly saturated with radioactive material that their bodies have begun to emit visible light. And then there is the detail the show drops into one episode so casually that most viewers do not register it at all. In the basement of the Springfield nuclear power plant, there are human skeletons, real bones, the remains of people who died inside an active reactor facility. The show never explains who those people were. It never identifies them. It never tells you how they came to be there or what killed them. It shows you the bones and moves on, and not a single character in the episode stops to ask a single question about it. That is the environment Homer Simpson works in every day. Now, Homer himself. The show's own creator has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. 55. That places him in a category of cognitive impairment so profound that, in the real world, he would be considered severely developmentally disabled. And yet this is the man whose job title is safety inspector at a nuclear power plant. the person whose literal professional responsibility is to ensure that the facility does not contaminate or kill the surrounding population. Homer sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. He has caused nuclear incidents through acts of extraordinary carelessness, including, in one canonical episode, throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if it would get bigger. He responds to alarms by silencing them rather than investigating their cause. And we later learn in Season 12 that the reason Homer is this way is partially explained by a crayon that has been lodged in his brain since childhood, physically pressing against the sections of his cerebral cortex responsible for higher thinking. When the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ rockets upward dramatically. He becomes articulate, insightful, and capable of understanding complex problems. Then he has the crayon put back in because being that aware of Springfield made him miserable. We will come back to that detail later because it matters more than it seems. For now, what is important is this. You have a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations dumping radioactive material into the water supply. You have a safety inspector who cannot actually perform the functions of his job by any conventional measure. And you have a billionaire owner who knows all of this, has the resources to fix all of this, and has made a calculated decision to allow all of this to continue. That is the foundation. That is the machine. And everything that happens in Springfield flows downstream from that machine. The first visible evidence of what the plant is doing to the surrounding environment appears in Season 2. His name is Blinky. He is a fish, and he has 3 eyes. Blinky is pulled from a local river near the power plant. He becomes national news within the show. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky's existence as the centerpiece of his campaign against Burns, arguing that the 3-eyed fish is irrefutable evidence that Burns has been poisoning the local environment for years. Burns is placed in a position where he is forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is safe for consumption. The town watches. His aide Smithers watches. The cameras roll. Burns eats the fish, and the town moves on. Nobody conducts a follow-up study on the river. Nobody tests the water supply. Nobody asks what other mutations might exist downstream. Nobody poses the question that should be inescapable in that moment. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people who have been drinking the same water? The answer has been sitting in the show since Season 8. In the episode called The Springfield Files, Homer encounters a figure in the woods near Springfield at night. The figure is glowing. It is making strange sounds. It moves in an eerie, disoriented way through the darkness. Homer, who is a man defined by his lack of analytical capability, concludes that he has seen an alien. The episode plays out as a full paranormal investigation. FBI agents are called in. The entire town becomes consumed by the possibility that extraterrestrial life has visited Springfield. It builds toward a dramatic reveal. And when the truth finally comes out, the glowing figure in the woods is not an alien from outer space. It is Mr. Burns. Burns, it is revealed, undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so chemically aggressive, and so saturated with radiation therapy that the process causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he will die. The regimen is so physically overwhelming that after each session, Burns wanders out of the medical facility in a state of euphoric disorientation, stumbling through the woods in the dark like a creature from another world. He literally glows. Not metaphorically. His body physically emits light because it is so saturated with radiation that basic bioluminescence has become one of his characteristics. And the people of Springfield, a community that lives directly beneath the cooling towers of a nuclear reactor, see a glowing figure stumbling through the dark woods, and their immediate instinct is to call the federal government about a potential alien visit. The possibility of radiation poisoning does not appear to cross a single mind in town. Not one person says the word radiation. Not one person looks up at the plant on the hill and draws a line between what they know is up there and what they are looking at in the trees. That is the depth of the denial. That is how thoroughly the town has been conditioned to look away from the obvious. And the Simpsons movie makes the situation impossible to ignore. By the time the film was released, Springfield's environmental contamination had escalated to a point where the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal regulatory agency operating within the show's own universe, determined that the town represented such an extreme threat to the surrounding environment that the only viable solution was physical containment. A massive glass dome was lowered over Springfield Think about what that actually means. The United States federal government looked at Springfield and concluded that the entire town was so toxic, so thoroughly saturated with environmental hazards, that the people and the land and the air and the water inside it needed to be sealed away from the rest of America. Not remediated, not cleaned up through careful environmental intervention, sealed, like a biological containment unit, like a quarantine zone. Springfield is not just a polluted town in the Simpsons movie. It is classified by the United States government as an active environmental hazard, and when the dome goes up, every resident of Springfield is inside it. Now look at the residents themselves. Look at them the way you would look at any population suspected of long-term environmental contamination exposure. Homer Simpson. Massive overbite. Eyes that protrude significantly beyond normal human anatomy. 4 fingers on each hand instead of 5. A skull shape that no human biology textbook has ever described. An IQ that qualifies clinically as severe intellectual disability, and a body that absorbs catastrophic physical trauma and bounces back from it at a rate that has no parallel in any documented medical literature. Homer has been shot. He has been electrocuted. He has fallen from significant heights. He has been hit by cars moving at speed. He has survived industrial explosions at close range. He has walked away from every single one of these events in a condition that ranges from completely unharmed to mildly inconvenienced. His pain tolerance is far beyond the human norm. His healing capacity defies known biology. His body is simply not doing what human bodies are supposed to do. Marge Simpson. The same bulging eyes as her husband. The same 4-fingered hands. Hair that grows vertically upward in a tower several feet tall, maintaining the exact same shape through 3 decades of weather, physical activity, and biological aging without any visible product or structural support. Marge was briefly employed at the plant herself. She was inside that facility. She was exposed to whatever Homer has been breathing and absorbing for the entirety of his working life. Bart, Lisa, Maggie, all 3 born in Springfield. All 3 raised in Springfield. All 3 drinking the same water and breathing the same air, and growing up directly beneath the cooling towers every single day. All 3 displaying physical characteristics that do not appear in normal human populations. The spiky hair that maintains its shape without product, the overbites, the bulging eyes, the yellow skin that covers every Springfield resident and only Springfield residents. That last detail is the one that makes the theory click into place. When guest characters visit Springfield, when celebrities or outsiders arrive from beyond the town's borders, they look different. Their proportions are more natural. Their features more closely resemble conventional human anatomy. Their eyes are more normally sized and shaped. The show draws visitors from outside Springfield with noticeably different and more realistic physical characteristics than it uses for people who actually live in the town. The official explanation that most people accept without examining it is simple. That is just the art style of the show. That is just how The Simpsons looks. The show draws its characters that way as a stylistic choice. But that explanation only works if you are evaluating the show purely as a piece of animation with no internal logic. The moment you start treating Springfield as a place that operates by its own rules, the explanation collapses. Because within the logic of the show's own universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live inside Springfield and people who come from outside it. The people inside the contamination zone display physical abnormalities. The people who come from outside the contamination zone look normal, not slightly different, fundamentally different. The show is not drawing Springfield residents the way it draws them because of an art style decision. The show is drawing Springfield residents the way it draws them because something has happened to their bodies that has not happened to the bodies of people who live elsewhere. And the only thing in Springfield's history that could account for a population-wide physical mutation of this consistency and this severity is the facility sitting on the hill above the town, dumping 342 active safety violations worth of radioactive material into the air and water every single day. Even the animals carry the signature. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners, the same physical proportions that deviate from normal canine anatomy. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. The wildlife in and around Springfield shows clear evidence of genetic mutation consistent with long-term radiation exposure. The show even tells you this directly, through Blinky, in one of its earliest seasons. It shows you a three-eyed fish and it says, clearly and without subtlety, this is what the radiation pouring out of that plant is doing to living organisms. And then it expects the audience to accept that the exact same radiation, from the exact same source, in the exact same environment, has had precisely zero effect on the humans who drink from the same rivers, breathe the same air, and live in the same downstream path. Burns knows this. He has always known this. The show makes his awareness explicit across multiple episodes. Burns funds private medical research. He employs personal physicians. He undergoes weekly treatments specifically designed to manage the effects of chronic radiation exposure in his own body. He understands the biological mechanics of radiation damage better than any other character in Springfield because he is personally dependent on managing those mechanics to stay alive. Burns has an entire pharmaceutical division capable of synthesizing experimental treatments. He has the infrastructure to study what radiation does to biological systems at a detailed level. He has spent over a century in close proximity to nuclear material and has built the medical architecture necessary to survive that proximity. He knows, with precision, what radioactive contamination does to living tissue. He knows it the way a man knows anything he has spent a century managing. And he knows what his plant has been doing to Springfield. He has always known. Because Springfield is not just the location of his power plant. Springfield is his laboratory. The town full of people downwind of his facility, drinking his runoff, breathing his emissions, raising their children in the shadow of his cracked cooling towers, is the longest-running uncontrolled experiment in environmental contamination in the history of American fiction. Here is the detail that transforms Burns from a cartoon villain into something genuinely disturbing. Homer's continued employment is not a mistake. It is not Burns being forgetful or negligent. It is deliberate strategy. The show establishes this clearly through a specific storyline. German investors briefly purchase the plant from Burns. The very first thing they do upon taking ownership is fire Homer. Their reasoning is straightforward. No competent nuclear facility would retain a safety inspector with Homer's track record. The second thing they do is assess the cost of bringing the facility up to legal safety standards. The estimate nearly bankrupts them. They sell the plant back to Burns at a significant loss. And Burns immediately rehires Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut that plant down. A competent safety inspector would look at 342 violations and call every regulatory agency in the country. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. And Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and by extension, the daily lives of every person in the town, a population that is, by this point, too cognitively compromised by decades of neurological radiation damage to understand what is happening to them. Now we arrive at the crayon again. And this is where the theory stops being just a theory about physical mutation and becomes something much darker. In Season 12, the crayon lodged in Homer's brain since childhood is surgically removed. What follows is one of the most quietly devastating sequences in the show's history. Homer's intelligence climbs sharply. He becomes articulate. He becomes analytical. He starts to see the world around him clearly, perhaps for the first time. And what he sees when he looks at Springfield with unclouded eyes is so unbearable that he eventually chooses to have the crayon put back in. He chooses to return to intellectual disability because the alternative is spending every day fully aware of how broken the world around him actually is. The show presents this as a poignant moment about the comfort of ignorance. But there is a harder question buried inside it. A question the show raises and then politely sidesteps. How did a crayon get lodged in a child's brain without anyone noticing? How did Homer grow up in Springfield, visit Springfield doctors, receive Springfield medical care throughout his childhood and adolescence and adult life? And not one medical professional in that entire time discovered a foreign object physically embedded in his skull? There are only two reasonable answers. Either every doctor in Springfield is so deeply incompetent that they failed to notice a crayon in a brain across decades of checkups, which is possible, given what we know about Springfield's general civic functionality. Or someone knew it was there. Someone in Springfield's medical establishment was aware of the crayon and made a decision not to remove it. And if Burns's influence extends into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he essentially owns, if the doctors are looking away from the evidence of radiation damage they see in their patients every day, then the crayon in Homer's brain is not an accident. It is a detail that tells you exactly how far the corruption goes. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains. Something that keeps them docile, that keeps them incurious, that keeps them standing at the base of those cracked cooling towers for 36 years without once looking up and asking why everything around them is so consistently, persistently, impossibly strange. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, every fish with 3 eyes and every child with 4 fingers. It all traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible poison into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged brains that cannot figure out why nothing in Springfield ever changes. The plant is not part of the show. The plant is the show. It always has been. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are and what time it is. And if you have not subscribed yet, do that too. I want to know who is still awake for this one. Number. Section 2. Homer's Coma. Every episode since 1993 is a dream. Here is where everything you just heard gets recontextualized. Because what if the radiation theory is correct, but it is only correct inside the mind of a man who has been lying unconscious in a hospital bed since April of 1993? On the 18th day of April, 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired. The episode was titled, So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was straightforward enough. Bart, in a spirit of April Fool's escalation, takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. The result is a can pressurized far beyond any reasonable structural tolerance. Homer cracks the can open. The explosion is powerful enough to put him in the hospital. He lands in a hospital bed, battered and recovering, and he spots a vending machine across the room from his bed. He tries to get a snack. The vending machine tips forward. It falls on him, and Homer Simpson flatlines. He enters a coma, a clinical, medically described coma. This is not a cutaway gag. It is not a dream sequence signaled by a wavy screen transition. The show is explicit. Homer Simpson is unconscious. He has lost awareness of the external world. He is in a hospital bed in Springfield General, and nobody knows when or whether he is going to wake up. And then, several scenes later, the episode ends with Homer apparently waking up. Bart is at his bedside, tearful, confessing that the whole thing was his fault. Homer jolts awake. He immediately starts strangling Bart. The family laughs. Everything goes back to normal. The show tells you Homer woke up, but in the final moments of that same episode, a doctor delivers a piece of information that the show drops into the scene and then walks away from as if it is a joke. The coma, the doctor explains, has caused Homer to lose 5% of his brain function, permanently. The damage cannot be reversed. That portion of Homer's cognitive capacity is simply gone. Homer's response to learning that he has sustained irreversible brain damage is to laugh. He tells his family he does not even know why he is laughing. The family finds this endearing. The episode ends, and The Simpsons continues for 32 more years as though this information is completely irrelevant. Unless Homer never actually woke up. Unless the show told you he woke up because that is what a dreaming brain would tell itself. This is the Homer coma theory. It is the most discussed, most debated, most internally consistent fan theory in the 36-year history of The Simpsons. The premise, originally explored by a Reddit user, is straightforward. Homer Simpson did not wake up from his coma in April of 1993. Every episode that has aired since that date is a dream. Every storyline, every character development, every guest appearance, every impossible event, every journey to a foreign country, every meeting with a celebrity, every time Homer survives something that should have killed him, all of it is being generated by the dreaming mind of an unconscious man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, while his family sits beside him and waits. The evidence, when you lay it out carefully, is not easy to dismiss. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a specific kind of show. It was a family sitcom rooted in recognizable domestic anxieties. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers whether she made the right choices in her marriage. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher and has her heart broken when he leaves. Bart faces the genuine possibility of being held back a year in school and has to grapple with what that means for his future. These are the stories of a real family navigating real pressures, financial stress, marital strain, parental failure, the gap between who you wanted to be and who you turned out to be. The emotional register of the early Simpsons is grounded. The satire is sharp, but the situations are recognizable. You could project these stories onto a real family without much adjustment. The show earned its reputation during these early seasons because it took the interior life of a working-class American family seriously while also making you laugh at the absurdity of that life. It was both tender and acerbic in a way that felt genuinely new. After the coma, the show becomes something else entirely. The shift is not gradual. It is not the kind of subtle tonal drift you might expect from a long-running series adjusting to changing tastes or a rotating writing staff. It is seismic, and it happens fast. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society with deep civic roots and arcane rituals. Homer discovers that his mother is a fugitive radical who has been hiding from federal law enforcement for nearly 3 decades. Homer meets God. Twice. Homer holds a different job in almost every episode. That follows from astronaut to food critic to country music singer to professional boxer to mayor's assistant to snowplow operator to a member of a barbershop quartet that becomes internationally famous. The escalation from grounded family sitcom to this is not what happens to a show that is still operating normally. It is what happens when the person telling the story has lost the anchor that kept the story connected to reality. The post-coma Simpsons is a show where the rules have changed, where physical consequences do not stick, where geography becomes irrelevant, where Homer can be in outer space 1 episode and back at his workstation 3 days later without anyone acknowledging the interval. It is a show where anything can happen, which sounds like creative freedom but is actually something closer to the opposite. It is a show where nothing matters because nothing is real. The coma theory argues that this is not a coincidence. The tonal shift does not happen randomly somewhere in the middle of the series. It happens at a specific, identifiable, canonical moment. It happens after the vending machine falls. But the theory does not rest entirely on the tonal shift, as compelling as that evidence is. There is a detail from 6 months before the coma episode that the theory points to with particular emphasis, and once you see it, it is difficult to see the show the same way again. In the Season 4 premiere, the episode Homer the Heretic, which aired roughly 6 months before the coma, Homer has a direct conversation with God, a real, face-to-face conversation. This is not metaphorical. The show depicts it as a genuine theological encounter, and during that conversation, God tells Homer something specific. He tells Homer that he will eventually learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God says Homer's time is coming, but that Homer has more to experience before it arrives. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline is precise. God told Homer that his time was approaching. 6 months later, Homer's conscious life ended. What the show presents in the context of the Season 4 premiere as a quirky theological gag, Homer talking to God about football and church attendance, reads, under the coma theory, as something much more significant. It reads as a warning. God was telling Homer that his waking life was nearly over, that everything that followed the approaching event would take place in a different kind of existence, that the version of life Homer was living in April of 1993 was about to stop. And 6 months later, it did. Now consider what the coma theory does to the aging problem, or rather to the absence of aging. Nobody in The Simpsons grows older. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not accumulated a visible year of age between them. The show uses what is called a floating timeline, meaning the present moment of the show is always calibrated to match the year in which the episode airs, while the characters remain frozen at their original ages. Every other theory about this show has to work to explain why nobody ages. They have to build elaborate frameworks, biological mutation from radiation, cartoonish logic, deliberate creative decisions to justify something that is genuinely extraordinary when you sit with it. The coma theory does not have to work at all. The aging problem dissolves completely. Nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen memory of an unconscious man. Homer went to sleep in April of 1993. His children were certain ages at that moment. His wife looked a certain way. His friends occupied certain positions in his life. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing up because he was not conscious to watch it happen. His mind can only simulate the versions of these people that existed at the moment the vending machine fell. And so the dream preserves them. Bart stays 10 because the last time Homer held a clear, waking memory of his son, Bart was 10. Lisa stays 8 for the same reason. Marge does not age because the face Homer sees when he closes his eyes is the face of the woman who was standing beside his hospital bed in 1993. The dream gives Homer what the coma took away. It gives him his family preserved at the exact moment he loved them most, the moment when they were all still there and everything was still possible. The celebrity appearances that flood the later seasons take on a completely different character under this theory too. Homer's unconscious brain is lying in a hospital room. Sounds are filtering in from the world outside. Television from the corner of the room, voices from conversations happening in the corridor, a radio, a phone call that someone is taking just outside his door. Homer's dreaming brain is not sealed off from external stimuli. It is receiving fragments of the outside world constantly and processing them in the way that dreaming brains process ambient information by incorporating them into the narrative. When a celebrity appears in a later season of The Simpsons, the coma theory suggests that you are not watching a famous person visit Springfield. You are watching Homer's unconscious mind process a name or a voice that filtered through the hospital room and weave it into the dream. The celebrity did not come to Springfield. The dream borrowed the celebrity from a television that was playing in the background of Homer's ward. Every famous person who shows up in a Springfield episode is actually a fragment of external sound and sensation translated into a dream character by a brain that is working desperately to keep the simulation coherent. Which explains why the later seasons feel like they have so many celebrities. It is not that Springfield became a magnet for famous people. It is that Homer's brain, as it continues to deteriorate in the coma, starts leaning more heavily on ambient stimuli to fill in the gaps. In the early stages of the coma, the dream is mostly constructed from memory, from the actual substance of Homer's real life. But as time passes, as the brain's own resources begin to thin, it has to supplement. It starts pulling in whatever comes through from outside. And what comes through from the outside, in a late 90s and 2000s American hospital room, is television, celebrity culture, pop music, talk shows, sports, all of it bleeding through the walls and into the dream. The show itself has engaged with this theory in a way that is impossible to read as accidental. In season 34, in an episode called Lisa the Boy Scout, a clip appeared that was framed as a deleted scene, a moment in which Homer wakes from a long coma and realizes that every outlandish episode of his life since 1993 was a dream. The clip was reportedly introduced as something that had been leaked by hackers and was not supposed to appear. The show's official position was that it was a hoax, a planted fake. But the fact that the clip was made at all is telling. The writers produced an animated sequence depicting Homer waking from a coma and discovering that his post-1993 life was imaginary. They animated it, they voiced it, they put real production work into it, and then they framed it as a joke. They showed you the truth and told you it was a prank. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory publicly in 2015. He said it was not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. But he did not explain why nobody in the show ages. He did not explain the precise tonal shift that begins immediately after the coma episode. He did not explain why God told Homer his time was approaching 6 months before Homer went unconscious. He did not explain why the show becomes progressively more surreal and disconnected from any grounded reality with each passing season, which is exactly the pattern you would expect from a dreaming brain slowly losing coherence as the body beneath it weakens. He just said it was not true, and the conversation moved on. But the coma theory does something that no official explanation of The Simpsons has ever done. It unifies the show. It takes everything that seems like a problem, the lack of aging, the tonal shift, the escalating absurdity, the complete absence of consequences between episodes, the reset button that wipes the slate clean after every catastrophe, the fact that Homer can survive literally anything because nothing is actually happening to his body, and it explains all of it with a single premise. Homer is dreaming. Everything since 1993 is the dream. And here is the part that does not leave you after you first encounter this theory. If the coma theory is true, then The Simpsons is not a comedy. Not at its core. At its core, underneath all the jokes and the guest appearances and the couch gags and the cultural satire, it is a story about a man whose deepest, most desperate wish is so simple it is almost unbearable. He wants his family. That is all. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be a mischievous little boy who drives him crazy, but who is also, unmistakably, his son. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her bedroom on a school night. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold. He wants to be able to walk through the front door at 5:30 and have them all be there. He wants a Friday night on the couch at the house on Evergreen Terrace to last forever. He wants the beer to be cold and the television to be on and his family to be present and accounted for. And in the coma, the dream gives him exactly that. It gives him his family, preserved in amber, his children never growing up, his wife never leaving, his life never ending. Every Sunday night, the credits roll, and everything resets, and Monday morning Homer wakes up and goes to work at the plant, and the loop begins again. Not because the writers are lazy, not because episodic television demands it, because Homer's brain refuses to let the story end, because if the story ends, Homer has to find out how much time has passed. He has to learn how old his children really are now. He has to discover whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, or whether he does not wake up at all. The coma is not a nightmare. Within the logic of the theory, it is the only heaven that a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young and the refrigerator is always full and nobody ever has to say goodbye. He is not trapped in the dream. He chose it. He is staying in it by choice, because the dream is better than the alternative, and the alternative is the weight of everything that has changed while he has been asleep. That is the coma theory. Every episode since April 19th, 1993, is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he cannot reach, and the show will never confirm it. But it will never disprove it either, because the evidence is not something a simple production decision can undo. It is baked into the structure of the series itself. It lives in the tonal shift and the aging freeze and the progressive surrealism and the God-given prophecy that preceded the accident by exactly 6 months. And every time the episode ends, every time Homer finds his way home, every time the credits roll and the family resets on the couch, it is not cartoon logic keeping the loop going. It is a man in a hospital bed somewhere in Springfield, holding on as hard as he can, because letting go means losing them. And Homer Simpson has been losing things his entire life. The dream is the one place he does not have to. Number. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Reopening the greatest mystery in animated history. Before we get into this one, I want to say something directly. The show told you it was Maggie. Season 7, Episode 1. Who shot Mr. Burns? Part 2. Case closed. The baby did it, but the case was never really closed. And the more carefully you look at the evidence, the actual documented evidence from the canonical episodes, the more it becomes clear that the official verdict is not the only verdict the facts support. In fact, it may be the verdict the facts support least. Let us go back to the summer of 1995. The Simpsons had just completed its 6th season. The show was at or near the peak of its cultural dominance. It was the most discussed television program in America. And in the season 6 finale, the writers attempted something that no animated show had ever seriously attempted before. A genuine mystery. A real whodunit, constructed with the deliberate architecture of a classic murder investigation, designed to keep the audience guessing through an entire summer and to reward the ones who figured it out. The setup took an entire episode. Mr. Burns had, by the end of the finale's first half, managed to personally wrong nearly every significant character in Springfield. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary School, collapsing the school's budget and eliminating programs and jobs. He used the wealth from that oil to fund the construction of a massive sun-blocking disc, a mechanical device he positioned over Springfield to block out sunlight entirely, forcing every resident to buy their electricity from his power plant, since solar energy would no longer be available to them. Along the way, he destroyed Moe's Tavern by bankrupting Moe during an ill-advised financial maneuver. He created a sinkhole that demolished the Springfield retirement castle. He injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, during the construction of his device. And when Smithers, his loyal assistant, the man who had devoted decades of his life to Burns's service, protested the sun-blocking scheme on moral grounds, Burns fired him on the spot. By the end of Part 1, the show had built a situation in which the entire population of Springfield had a documented, motivated reason to want Burns dead. The town gathered for a public confrontation. Tension filled the room. Multiple characters were shown in possession of weapons. And then Burns collapsed. A single gunshot wound. He staggered to the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on 2 letters. The screen went black. America had to wait the entire summer. When Part 2 aired in September, the investigation began. Chief Wiggum and the Springfield police moved through the suspect list with the competence you would expect. Smithers confessed almost immediately, but his confession disintegrated when it became clear he had been in a blackout drunk state at the time of the shooting and had actually shot someone else entirely. He shot old Jasper in the wooden leg. Different victim, different location, wrong crime. One by one, suspects are cleared. And then the investigation turns. A crucial piece of evidence surfaces: an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis traces it back to a Simpson. Homer's fingerprints are on the murder weapon. He had the most clearly personal motive of anyone in town. Burns had never once remembered his name, despite Homer working for him for years. A fact that had escalated to a genuine breaking point just before the shooting. Homer is arrested. He is about to be convicted. Burns wakes up from his coma and identifies his shooter: Maggie Simpson, the 1-year-old baby. According to Burns's account, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot following the town meeting. He reached for her lollipop because this is Mr. Burns, and nothing about his behavior is surprising, and in the struggle that followed, his own gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was hit, and the mystery was officially solved. But now let us look at the actual mechanics of what the show gave us. The national contest. Fox invited viewers to submit guesses for the shooter's identity before the answer aired. This was a significant promotional campaign. The winner would be animated into a future episode of the show. It was treated as a genuine intellectual challenge. Here are the clues. Figure it out. Show us you paid attention. According to the DVD commentary, when the contest concluded, not a single person from the randomly selected sample of entries had guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The prize was awarded randomly to someone who did not have the right answer, and because that person had not identified Maggie, they received a cash settlement instead of an animation cameo. The producers were aware of one person who had correctly identified Maggie on an online message board the night of the original broadcast, but that person was using a college internet account that had been deactivated by the time the producers tried to reach them. They issued an open invitation for that person to come forward. As far as anyone has established, they never did. So the show's creators built a mystery they told the public was solvable from the available clues. They ran a national contest around it, and when the answer was revealed, the mystery had defeated essentially every viewer who engaged with it seriously. Either the clues were insufficient, the red herrings were too convincing, or the answer did not flow logically from the evidence in the way the show implied it would. Now consider the sundial. Burns falls and his hands land on the letters W and S. Or, from Burns's perspective looking upward, M and S. The show resolves this as M for Maggie and S for Simpson. This is treated as one of the central pieces of evidence pointing to Maggie's guilt. Burns himself, in the episode, states clearly and on the record that the way his hands landed on those letters was not intentional. He did not arrange himself on the sundial to spell out his attacker's initials. He just fell. The position of his hands was coincidental. The central clue, the signature piece of physical evidence that the show uses to validate its chosen answer, was explicitly described by the victim as meaningless. Burns says it himself. He was not pointing at anything. He just fell that way. So the sundial is not evidence of anything. It is a coincidence that the show then constructs a narrative around, which means the architecture of the official solution is built on a foundation that its own witness has described as accidental. Then there is the matter of the gun. Burns carried a firearm in a holster. Careful viewers noted that at some point prior to the shooting, the holster is shown to be empty. The gun was already missing from Burns's person before the attack. Whoever shot Burns used Burns's own weapon. This means the shooter was someone who did not arrive at the confrontation armed. Most of the characters who attended the town meeting had brought weapons with them. They came ready for a potential violent confrontation with Burns. The person who shot Burns was someone who did not plan to shoot anyone, who was unarmed when they arrived, and who only ended up with a gun because they found Burns's weapon by chance or had access to it through proximity. A baby picking up a fallen gun fits that profile. But so does a substantial number of other characters who were not carrying weapons that night. And then there is what Burns said immediately before being shot. His last words, as the shooter approached, were, "Oh, it's you." Not a sound of surprise. Not a cry of fear. Not a protest. A calm, flat recognition. "Oh, it's you." The way you greet someone familiar. someone you know and have interacted with before, someone whose presence does not alarm you, even in a tense moment. The question this raises is fundamental. Does Mr. Burns recognize Maggie Simpson in a way that would produce that reaction? Has he, prior to this episode, had the kind of personal interaction with Maggie that would cause him to see her approaching and respond with calm recognition rather than confusion or alarm? The show does not establish a meaningful prior relationship between Burns and Maggie. Burns barely recognizes Homer, a man who has worked for him for years, appearing in his office regularly, whose face he has seen hundreds of times. The idea that Burns would look at a baby he has no established connection with and respond with, "Oh, it's you," in the warm, flat tone of acknowledging a familiar acquaintance does not align with everything the show has told us about how Burns processes the people around him. "Oh, it's you" is the greeting of a man who knows his attacker, who has an established relationship with them, who recognizes them immediately and without confusion. That language fits someone in Burns's close orbit far more naturally than it fits a baby he has no documented prior relationship with. Now, Season 18. Homer, in a conversation that the show treats as a throwaway moment, states that he was the one who shot Burns. He just says it, out loud, on camera. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. No legal consequences follow. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the wealthiest man in Springfield, and the scene proceeds as if this is background noise. Either Homer is lying, which is entirely consistent with his character, and would not be the first time he has taken credit for something dramatic simply for the attention. Or the original verdict was wrong, and Homer said it because he knows it is true, because he is the one who pulled the trigger. If Homer did it, then Maggie was framed, and not through a deliberate conspiracy necessarily, but through the mechanics of how the investigation played out. The DNA on the gun pointed to a Simpson. Burns woke up from a coma, disoriented, and gave an account of the shooting that he may have constructed or misremembered. And the investigation run by Chief Wiggum, who is not exactly a figure of forensic excellence, settled on Maggie because she was the answer that solved every subsequent problem simultaneously. Chief Wiggum himself states it plainly. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Case closed, no prosecution, no consequences. The richest man in town recovered, the criminal investigation was wrapped up neatly, and the one person who could never be held accountable for anything became the official culprit. Maggie was the perfect fall guy. She is an infant. She cannot deny the accusation. She cannot testify on her own behalf. She cannot even fully understand what she is being accused of. She cannot be prosecuted, imprisoned, or punished in any way that the justice system recognizes. And if someone in Springfield's power structure wanted to protect the real shooter, whether out of loyalty, affection, or strategic interest, pointing at Maggie was the cleanest resolution available. The alternate shooters have their own compelling arguments, and we should look at them honestly. The Marge theory, which circulates in the fan community with some persistence, makes a case that is surprisingly strong. Marge had genuine motive. Burns had systematically dismantled the things she cared about most: her children's school, her family's dog, the community that surrounded her family. She is not a passive character. In episodes throughout the series, Marge demonstrates a capacity for decisive and occasionally aggressive action when the people she loves are threatened. She is also one of the characters at the town meeting who would not necessarily have been carrying a weapon, making her consistent with the profile of someone who used Burns's own gun. And Burns's behavior toward Marge in earlier episodes, specifically in the episode where Burns develops a significant infatuation with her, provides an explanation for why Burns might have looked at her approaching, said, "Oh, it's you," with a warm recognition rather than alarm, and why, upon waking from his coma, he might have declined to name her as his attacker. Burns was infatuated with Marge. He took a bullet and chose to protect her. The Smithers alternate ending is the other major branch. The producers animated a complete, fully voiced, fully produced alternate conclusion in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. This ending was screened during the Simpsons' 138th episode Spectacular, hosted by Troy McClure, who dismissed it by explaining that the DNA evidence would have had to be ignored to make Smithers the shooter, which would be downright nutty. And then Troy McClure winks at you, because the line is a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which had just concluded, in which a jury had famously declined to be guided by DNA evidence. The show is telling you, in the clearest terms it can without saying it outright, that ignoring DNA evidence is something that happens in the real world all the time, that the official answer is not the only possible answer, that the machinery of a verdict and the machinery of justice are not always the same machine, the contest nobody won, the clues the victim himself described as accidental, the alternate endings that were fully produced, Homer's uncontested confession in a later season, Burns's last words describing his shooter as a familiar face, the final shot of Maggie alone in the room, checking to make sure nobody is watching before she mimics the motion of pulling a trigger. Does that last shot prove she did it? Or is it a baby imitating something she witnessed? Children imitate what they observe. A 1-year-old who watched an adult shoot someone and was then placed at the center of a dramatic investigation full of people acting strangely around her might, alone in a quiet room, replay the gesture she saw. Not because she did it, because she saw it. The greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never actually solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are two very different things. Number, Section 4. The Immortal Architect, How Mr. Burns Has Been Alive for Over a Century and Why Springfield Cannot Afford for Him to Die. How old is Mr. Burns? This seems like it should be a simple question. The show has been running for 36 years. Burns has been in it since the beginning. He has been old since the beginning. His age has come up across dozens of episodes, in flashbacks and offhand remarks and moments of canonical biography. And yet when you try to pin down exactly how many years this man has been alive, the answer becomes one of the most genuinely strange ongoing threads in the entire series. The most conservative estimate, drawing only from the most firmly established biographical details, places Burns's birth somewhere in the late 1800s. His personal memories extend back to before the turn of the 20th century. He has referenced events from the 1910s as though he experienced them firsthand. He has described working relationships with historical figures who died before most of the show's audience was born. He attended Yale. He served in the Second World War, in a capacity that the show makes clear involved moral compromises significant enough that he probably does not mention them at formal dinners. He had a personal relationship with Howard Hughes. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war and hid it for decades. By the most conservative reading of the show's established timeline, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the more expansive readings, taking into account all the historical events he has personally referenced, he could be approaching 140, maybe beyond that. And he does not just exist in some diminished, barely functional capacity. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He orchestrates schemes of genuine complexity that require long-term planning, sustained attention, working knowledge of modern finance and modern law, and the ability to manage a large organization effectively. He manipulates municipal politics. He outmaneuvers opponents who are half a century younger than him on a regular basis. His physical body is frail. Yes, his grip strength is famously inadequate, his eyesight is poor, his mobility is limited. But his mind is razor-sharp. Mr. Burns is arguably the most strategically intelligent character in Springfield. He has been operating at that level for longer than any human being should be capable of sustaining conscious function. The show addresses his survival mechanism directly in the Springfield Files, the same episode that inadvertently revealed the depths of Springfield's radiation denial. Burns, we learn, undergoes a weekly medical treatment. The treatment is so chemically and radiologically intensive that it causes his body to emit visible light, the green glow. That is the treatment's signature effect, and the treatment must be administered on a precise weekly schedule. Missing it by even a few days is not a matter of inconvenience. Missing it means Burns dies. Think about that with the attention it deserves. Charles Montgomery Burns, the most powerful man in Springfield, the man whose fortune predates American infrastructure, whose influence extends into every institution the town possesses, is kept alive by a recurring medical procedure that has to happen on a specific schedule every 7 days. His life is maintained the way you maintain a piece of machinery, through scheduled service, through components being replaced and systems being recalibrated on a fixed timetable. Miss the appointment and the machine stops. And the treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure as a life-sustaining biological necessity. Burns is not just profiting from nuclear power. His body has become so fundamentally altered by over a century of proximity to radioactive material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. It requires external radiation input the way a normal human body requires nutrition and water. The radiation is not just something Burns works with. The radiation is something Burns runs on. This explains a scene that the show plays for laughs, but which, under this framework, is genuinely alarming in its implications. Burns visits a doctor. The doctor conducts a thorough examination, and the diagnosis comes back as follows. Mr. Burns has every disease known to medical science. Not one disease. Not several serious diseases. Every single one. Simultaneously. The doctor explains that all of these conditions are present in Burns's body at the same time, but they exist in a state of perfect biological equilibrium. Each disease is canceling out every other disease. They are all trying to progress, all trying to kill their host, all fighting for dominance in the same biological territory at the same moment, and because they are all fighting simultaneously, none of them can gain the ground needed to become fatal. The doctor describes it as Three Stooges syndrome, using the metaphor of three people trying to fit through a single doorway at once. None of them can get through because they are all blocking each other. The conclusion is that Burns is the sickest human being in the United States and simultaneously functionally indestructible, because every mechanism that should be killing him is being blocked by every other mechanism that should be killing him. The show uses this scene as one of its great comedic set pieces. It is regularly cited as one of the funniest moments in the series. But if you set the comedy aside and look at what is actually being described, the scene is not funny at all. What the doctor is describing is a biological system so thoroughly altered from its original state that it no longer functions by any recognizable rules. Burns's body is not a human body in any conventional sense. It is a system that has been running so far outside its normal operational parameters for so long that it has essentially ceased to be a human body and become something else. Something that requires weekly radiation maintenance. Something that hosts every human disease simultaneously without succumbing to any of them. Something that can be shot, hospitalized, poisoned, abandoned in the wilderness, and still be back in the office on Monday. The weekly treatments are not curing Burns's diseases. They are managing them, holding them in stasis, keeping every illness balanced against every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining dominance. It is not medicine, it is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and the weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting control rods to prevent a meltdown. Remove the maintenance and everything cascades out of control simultaneously. Now consider Smithers. Waylon Smithers, Burns's personal assistant. The show has established their relationship as one of the most complex and layered in the series. Smithers is devoted to Burns with an intensity that goes far beyond professional loyalty. He monitors Burns's condition constantly. He manages his schedule with meticulous attention. He ensures Burns makes every appointment, every medical session, every obligation that needs to be met on the fixed schedule that keeps Burns functioning. The popular reading of Smithers' devotion is that it is driven by love. That Smithers has given his life to a man he is deeply, hopelessly attached to. And that reading is not wrong. But it is not complete. Because under the immortality framework, Smithers' devotion is not just emotional, it is medical. Smithers is the only person who fully understands how Burns's treatment protocol works. He is the only person who can be trusted to make sure the appointments happen on schedule, to monitor for signs that the treatments are becoming less effective, to manage the coordination between Burns and the physicians who perform the procedures. Without Smithers managing the protocol, Burns would miss a treatment within a relatively short period of time. The equilibrium would collapse. Every disease in his body would surge forward at once, and Burns would die. Smithers knows this. He has known it for decades. His devotion to Burns is not just loyalty. It is the awareness that his absence is a death sentence. That every day he stays and manages the schedule is a day Burns continues to exist. He has made himself so thoroughly indispensable to Burns's survival that leaving is not an emotional option, it is a biological one. Smithers is not just Burns's assistant. He is Burns's life support system, disguised as a man in a neat suit who fetches coffee and manages meetings. Burns's connections to historical events add another dimension to the immortality question. The show has placed him in personal proximity to an extraordinary range of significant historical moments. He attended Yale during the Gilded Age. He interacted with figures from early 20th century American history as contemporaries. He served during the Second World War in a capacity that the show does not fully detail, but implies involved choices he would prefer not to examine too closely. The trillion-dollar bill he stole from the government and hid for decades eventually becomes a plot point in an episode where Burns attempts to reconnect with it. The Burns family, as the show establishes it, is one of the oldest and most continuously powerful dynasties in American history. They were not merely wealthy. They were the kind of wealthy that builds the infrastructure that everyone else subsequently has to pay to use. The kind of wealthy that predates the concept of American infrastructure. The kind of wealthy that exists so far above the legal and regulatory framework of the society around it that accountability becomes a theoretical construct rather than a practical reality. Burns inherited this legacy and has been extending it for over a century, which raises a question the show never answers but leaves sitting in the room like a large piece of furniture nobody acknowledges. Is Burns unique? Is he the first member of his family to survive this long? Or have previous Burns patriarchs employed similar strategies? Different strategies appropriate to different eras, but strategies with the same goal. Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before any of the technology that currently maintains Burns's biological functions, did earlier generations of the Burns dynasty use other methods to sustain their hold on power across what should have been natural generational transitions? The show does not say. But it does establish that the Burns family has maintained continuous control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity does not happen through ordinary inheritance and luck. It requires either extraordinary longevity or extraordinary measures to simulate the effect of longevity. And the current Mr. Burns, who has been alive for over a century through medical engineering, suggests that the family has always been willing to pursue extraordinary measures. Here is the part that makes this more than just a character study. The scariest element of Burns's immortality is not that he might live forever. It is that Springfield needs him to. The town's economy is built on the plant. The plant is built around Burns. Burns is sustained by the treatments. The treatments are sustained by the infrastructure that Burns's wealth provides. It is a closed loop, a self-reinforcing system where the man, the machine, and the money all feed each other in a cycle that has no natural exit point. Springfield cannot meaningfully challenge Burns, because challenging Burns would mean confronting the plant, and confronting the plant would mean dismantling the economic foundation that the entire town depends on. The people of Springfield are not merely victims of Burns's power. They are participants in the system that maintains it, because the alternative to the system is worse than the system itself. Burns is not immortal because he is supernatural. He is immortal because he built a machine that makes his death too expensive for anyone around him to afford. He is, to use the show's own framing, too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as he keeps the lights on. Which, if the treatment schedule holds, will be forever. Number, Section 5. Maggie Simpson, the silent apex predator of Evergreen Terrace. Maggie Simpson has not said a meaningful word in 36 years. She has been 1 year old for 3.5 decades. She communicates primarily through the rhythmic sounds of her pacifier and an occasional pointed stare that lands with more weight than most adults manage with a full sentence. She cannot walk reliably. She cannot dress herself. She requires constant physical care for the most basic aspects of daily life. She is, by every observable metric, a completely dependent infant. And she has, in the time since she first appeared on screen, shot a billionaire, led a successful rebellion against a tyrannical daycare administrator, saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations, using methods that required sophisticated problem-solving, demonstrated intellectual capabilities that would be remarkable in a grown adult, and operated continuously below the radar of everyone around her, including her own family, without anyone appearing to notice what is actually living behind those enormous eyes. The shooting comes first because it is the act that defined her public identity, even though it is, in many ways, the least interesting thing she has ever done. We have already worked through the evidence around the Burns shooting in the previous section. We have established that the case for Maggie's guilt, while officially accepted, rests on foundations that do not hold up to rigorous examination. But whether Maggie intentionally pulled that trigger, or whether she was a convenient scapegoat for a crime committed by someone else, what matters for understanding Maggie as a character is what happens immediately after the official verdict is delivered. Everyone leaves the room. The investigation is concluded, The family disperses. Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully. She checks her surroundings with a deliberateness that is not reflexive. She is not an infant randomly scanning a room. She is checking to confirm that nobody is watching. She establishes that she is unobserved. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that precisely mimics pulling a trigger. The show presents this as the confirmation. Maggie did it, and she knows she did it. And she is replaying the moment in private. That is the intended reading. But there is another reading that the evidence supports equally well. What if Maggie witnessed the shooting? What if she was present in the parking lot, as Burns's account places her, and she watched someone else shoot Burns? Babies imitate. That is one of their primary learning mechanisms. They observe actions performed by people around them, and they reproduce those actions. A 1-year-old who watched an adult fire a gun and who then found herself at the center of an investigation full of adults behaving strangely and intensely around her might replay the gesture she observed, privately, when nobody was watching, not as a confession but as a memory. What makes that moment genuinely unsettling is not which reading is correct, it is the behavior surrounding the moment. The checking. The deliberate verification that she is alone before performing the gesture. That sequence: observe the environment, confirm privacy, then act requires situational awareness. It requires memory. It requires caution. It requires impulse control, because the impulse to move the pacifier had to be consciously suppressed until the right moment. Those are not infant behaviors. Those are behaviors associated with someone who understands that what they are doing has implications, and who has made a calculated decision that this particular action should not be performed in front of an audience. That level of behavioral sophistication in a 1-year-old is not a small thing. The Longest Daycare is the short film released in 2012 that serves as the most sustained, most focused examination of Maggie's cognitive capabilities in the show's entire history. It is 7 minutes long, it was nominated for an Academy Award, and it is, functionally, a demonstration of something that the canonical episodes have been hinting at since the show began. Maggie is dropped at the Ayn Rand School for Tots. The facility is run with an authoritarianism that the short film makes no effort to disguise. Inside, Maggie encounters a caterpillar in the process of becoming a butterfly. She forms an attachment to it. She wants to protect it. Another baby, a recurring antagonist in Maggie's world named Gerald, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the other baby, the daycare staff members, and the facility's security systems to protect the caterpillar and ultimately release it safely to the outside world. She does all of this without speaking. She does it without being able to walk reliably. She falls, she crawls, she stumbles repeatedly, but her decision-making throughout the sequence is not just competent, it is flawless. Every choice she makes is the correct choice. Every move is optimized for the situation she is in. She reads the environment accurately on the first pass. She identifies threats before they materialize. She develops responses to obstacles in real time, adjusting her strategy as new information arrives. She executes multi-step plans that require spatial reasoning, timing, the ability to predict other people's behavior, and the capacity to manage competing priorities simultaneously. This is adaptive problem-solving at a level that most adults struggle with in stressful environments. Her body cannot keep pace with her mind. She falls when she needs to run. She has to crawl when walking would be faster. Her physical development is genuinely that of a 1-year-old, and it imposes real limitations on what she can physically execute. But her cognition compensates for every physical limitation her body imposes, and she succeeds in her objective anyway because intelligence, in this case, is sufficient to overcome physical constraint. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly at various points in the canonical episodes. The results vary by episode, as is consistent with the show's floating timeline and its general approach to continuity. But the pattern is consistent even when the specific numbers are not. Maggie registers as exceptional, off-scale. Her measured intelligence, in the episodes where it is formally assessed, is described as beyond what the available tests can adequately measure. The show plays this for quick jokes and moves on, but the pattern has been established so many times, across so many different contexts, that it cannot be read as anything other than intentional. Maggie is not a normal baby. She has never been a normal baby. Now consider what she has been doing with all of that intelligence for 36 years. She has been watching. The show's approach to Maggie's silence has shifted subtly over its run. In the early seasons, Her silence is simply part of her character. She is the baby. Babies do not talk. The joke writes itself. But as the show developed, as Maggie's intelligence was periodically confirmed through the kind of action sequences and problem-solving demonstrations we have been discussing, her silence acquired a different quality. It started to look less like an absence and more like a choice. Look at the family she was born into. Homer is extraordinarily loud, constantly expressing himself with an emotional transparency that borders on pathological. Marge is vocal about her anxieties, her concerns, her expectations. Bart has built an entire identity around making himself impossible to ignore. Lisa is the most verbally intense member of the family. She lectures, she argues, she advocates, she never stops making herself heard. And Maggie sits in the middle of all of it. Silent, watching, processing. Now look at what happened to the one member of the family who did make herself heard. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. Genuinely brilliant. Her IQ, when the show bothers to address it formally, places her at a level that makes her a statistical anomaly. She is the smartest person in her household and, in most situations, the smartest person in the room. And what has that intelligence earned her in Springfield? Isolation, dismissal, mockery. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. She challenges authority and gets punished or sidelined. She tries to improve the community around her and gets worn down by the weight of a town that prefers its comfortable dysfunction to any improvement that requires effort. Her intelligence is her most defining characteristic, and it has made her simultaneously exceptional and profoundly lonely. She wears it on the outside. She announces it. She refuses to hide it, and the world around her refuses to reward it. Maggie watched all of this unfold. Maggie has been watching it unfold since the day she was born into this family. She observed her brilliant older sister fight every day for recognition and receive resistance every time. She processed the lesson that Springfield delivers to intelligent women who make themselves visible. The lesson that visibility is a vulnerability, that announcing your capability is an invitation for the world to find ways to limit it. And Maggie drew a different conclusion than Lisa did. Lisa's conclusion was that the fight was worth it regardless of the cost. Maggie's conclusion was something quieter, something colder, something more strategic. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they see of you, the more you can accomplish. Think about what Maggie has actually managed to accomplish while everyone around her was looking elsewhere. She shot the richest, most powerful man in Springfield without being prosecuted, because nobody suspects a baby. She led a successful daycare rebellion against an administrator who controlled the entire environment because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act, every display of intelligence, every moment where Maggie's capabilities made the difference in a critical situation, all of it happened in the spaces where no one was paying attention. And Maggie has consistently maintained those spaces by sustaining the most effective disguise available to her. She pretends to be what everyone assumes she is, a quiet, passive, dependent infant. She performs helplessness as a strategic posture. And because everyone around her wants to see a baby, because their expectations are already set before they look at her, the disguise works perfectly every time. Now place Maggie inside the radiation framework we established in the first section. If Springfield's contaminated environment creates mutations, and if those mutations affect different individuals in different ways depending on some combination of genetic predisposition, duration of exposure, and biological specificity, then Maggie and Homer represent opposite endpoints of the same spectrum. Homer's exposure, beginning before birth and extending through his entire life, reduced his cognitive function to a level that qualifies as severe disability. Maggie, born into the same environment, exposed to the same contaminants, appears to have had the opposite response. Her cognitive function was not diminished, it was amplified, dramatically, to a level that is, by the show's own reckoning, beyond the scale of available measurement tools. Same family, same water, same air, same cracked cooling towers on the horizon. But where the father's brain was diminished, the daughter's was supercharged. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive coin. He is the cautionary example of what mutation costs. She is the unexpected example of what mutation occasionally, improbably, grants. And if the coma theory is layered on top of all of this, if every episode since 1993 is Homer's dream, then Maggie's genius takes on an almost unbearably poignant dimension. Homer cannot see his youngest daughter grow up. He cannot watch her develop. He cannot hear her speak her first real words or see her take her first reliable steps, or learn what kind of person she is becoming in the real world while he lies unconscious. So in the dream, his unconscious mind gives her everything. It makes her extraordinary. It makes her capable of things no actual one-year-old could do. Because Homer's sleeping brain needs to believe that his youngest child will be okay even without him there, that she has what she needs to survive, that she is protected by her own capacity in a way that does not require him to be present. Her genius, in that reading, is not a mutation. It is a father's prayer, projected onto a dream. But back in Springfield, in whatever waking world may still exist there, a darker reading persists. Maggie does not speak, because speaking does not work in this town. Maggie does not reveal her intelligence, because intelligence is punished in Springfield. She watches everything. She understands everything. She files everything away in whatever extraordinary cognitive architecture she has built behind that blank infant stare. And she waits. For what? The show has never told us. Maggie's endgame is the one question in The Simpsons that remains genuinely, completely open. We have seen what she is capable of. We have seen her shoot a man. We have seen her command a room full of other infants. We have seen her solve problems that defeat the adults around her, but we have never seen her fully deploy whatever capacity she actually has. We have never seen Maggie decide to stop waiting and act with her full capability in a context that is significant enough to reveal the scale of what she can do. That is the last real mystery of the Simpson family. Not what Maggie has done, but what she is waiting to do. And when she finally decides, when she breaks the silence she has maintained for 36 years and steps out from behind the disguise of helpless infancy, Springfield will not see it coming. Because that is exactly how Maggie designed it. The most capable person on Evergreen Terrace has spent 3.5 decades making sure that when she finally moves, no one will have seen it coming. Number, Section 6. Mona Simpson and the 3-Generation Conspiracy. How Burns broke one family across 30 years. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the settled, official biographical fact. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told him his mother had passed away when Homer was young. There was a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up with a specific understanding of his own history that he was a boy whose mother died, whose father was too emotionally closed off to adequately fill the resulting void, and that the particular shape of loneliness he carried into adulthood was simply the price of having been born into his particular family. That understanding was wrong. Season 7, Episode 7, Mother Simpson, aired November 19th, 1995. Widely considered one of the greatest episodes in the history of the series. And it is the episode that transforms every previous season of the show into something retrospectively darker than it appeared to be at the time. Here is what happens. Homer, in an attempt to avoid working on a Saturday, fakes his own death. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant and lets the town believe he has died. When the deception becomes complicated, Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records and have the death record corrected. Homer goes, and while he is there, he discovers something in the municipal records that changes his understanding of his own life. According to the official documentation, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him was not hers. It was the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet. Homer's father had been pointing his son at a famous American writer's headstone and telling him it was his mother's burial site. For Homer's entire childhood and adolescence and into his adult life, his mother had been alive somewhere in the world, and the man who was supposed to be his family had been maintaining a lie that left Homer believing he was unloved. Believing he was the kind of son whose mother preferred not to stay. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave because she also believes Homer is dead. There is a reunion scene. It is one of the most genuinely moving sequences The Simpsons has ever produced. A grown man and his mother finding each other after 27 years, surrounded by the graves of people who are not them. And Mona tells Homer the truth about why she left. The year was 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She had a young son named Homer. She was ordinary in the way that most people are ordinary, living a quiet domestic life in Springfield, while the world outside was in the middle of a social and political upheaval that had not yet reached her front porch. And then something changed. She was radicalized. She encountered ideas and people and causes that pulled her out of domestic quietude and into political action. She joined a group of activists. and the target they chose for their action was a biological weapons laboratory. A laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Let that sit for a moment, because this is the detail that transforms Burns from a cartoon villain into something genuinely systemic. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He also owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory designed to produce and store biological weapons of sufficient potency to constitute a genuine threat in Springfield, the same town where Homer was growing up. The same community where families were raising children in what they believed was a safe and normal environment. The man who provided their electricity was also, a few miles away, developing weaponized pathogens. Mona's group broke into the facility. They deployed what the show calls an antibiotic bomb, a device designed to destroy the biological agents stored inside the lab by neutralizing them chemically. The raid succeeded. The pathogens were destroyed. And in the chaos of the escape, one specific thing went wrong. As the group fled, Mona stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the confusion. The person she stopped to help was Mr. Burns. She extended a hand to the man whose weapons she had just destroyed. Burns looked up at her. He saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. From that moment forward, Mona Simpson's life was over in any recognizable sense. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not explain to her young son why she was disappearing. She kissed Homer while he was sleeping and walked out into the night. And for 27 years, Homer grew up believing his mother was dead, shaped by an absence that was not natural but manufactured. Not the absence of death, but the absence of exile, enforced by one man's grudge and the legal machinery he used to sustain it. Burns did not just identify Mona to the FBI, he pursued her, actively, for decades. When Mona returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns spots her through a cab window almost immediately. He recognizes her. He calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, this time knowing why she is leaving and who is responsible. And then Homer goes back to work. At the power plant. For Burns. Homer works for the man who destroyed his family. He earns his paycheck from the person responsible for the absence that shaped everything about who he became. He sits in Sector 7G every day, eating his donuts and sleeping at his workstation, under the employment of the human being who took his mother from him. And Homer does not connect the dots. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not even seem to fully process the relationship between the billionaire who signs his checks and the billionaire who stole his childhood. The show does not play Homer's inability to make this connection as a joke. It plays it as tragedy, because Homer Simpson is not capable of making connections like that. The radiation, the crayon, the decades of cognitive erosion from living in Springfield's contaminated environment. Homer's brain does not have the analytical capacity needed to map the architecture of his own suffering. But here is where the conspiracy becomes fully dimensional. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life. The effect of Mona's absence on Homer is not collateral damage. Under the theory that has been building across everything we have discussed in this video, the effect on Homer is precisely what Burns needed to happen. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up with a specific psychological profile. He grew up emotionally damaged, desperate for approval from authority figures, constitutionally incapable of challenging the people who held power over him, and terrified of abandonment in a way that made him cling to whatever stability he could find, rather than risk losing it. Burns needed an employee who would show up to the most dangerous workplace in Springfield every day, who would sign off on violations rather than report them, who would silence alarms rather than investigate them, and who would absorb years of being forgotten and overlooked, and still come back the next morning because the alternative, losing the job, losing the income, losing the one structure that kept his life together, was unthinkable. Homer's psychological profile, shaped by his mother's absence and his father's emotional unavailability, made him exactly that employee. Not through anything Burns consciously engineered after the fact, but through the initial act of destroying Mona's ability to stay. The broken version of Homer is the version Burns requires. And Burns made sure the broken version was the one who grew up. The show later confirms the explicit deal that underlies Homer's impossible job security. Burns committed a crime. Abe Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would always have a position at the plant. No matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how many times normal employment logic would have demanded his termination, and the show establishes that the number is 742 documented errors. Burns kept the deal, Homer kept the job, and neither of them ever told Homer why. Homer's mother was a radical who fought against a billionaire's biological weapons program. That billionaire retaliated by destroying her family's integrity for the next 3 decades. Her husband made a deal with the person who destroyed it, burying the truth and taking the money. Her son grew up believing he was worthless, spent his childhood without adequate emotional support, became cognitively impaired through a combination of environmental contamination and physical brain damage, and has spent his entire adult life working for the man who made all of it happen. 3 generations of Simpsons, broken by one man's need to protect his business interests. And Burns won. He always wins. Because in Springfield, the man with the resources writes the rules, and the rules say Homer Simpson will be in Sector 7G until the story ends. The show proved what Homer could have been in the Crayon episode. Without the cognitive impairment, Homer is brilliant. He is articulate and insightful and capable of understanding the world around him with a clarity that changes everything. The man Homer could have been is fully realized in that episode. The man Homer would have been if Burns had not intervened, if Mona had stayed, if Abe had not made the deal, if the system had not been built specifically to ensure that this particular man remained small and manageable. That man exists somewhere inside Homer's skull, trapped behind a crayon and a lifetime of damage. And he chose to stay trapped because being that aware of Springfield was unbearable. But the choice was rigged from the beginning. Homer was never meant to be capable of that awareness in Springfield. Burns made sure of that when Homer was 6 years old and his mother walked out into the dark. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the quietest and most devastating moments the show has ever produced. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away for the last time. No joke. No cutaway. No reset. Just a man and his mother and 30 years of stolen time, pressing down on both of them. The comedy that surrounds this scene does not touch it. The scene exists in its own register, and that register is grief. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the comedy there is this. A family that was systematically broken by one man's power. A mother who fought back and lost everything. A father who made a deal with the devil and spent the rest of his life living with it. A son who inherited the consequences and never fully understood why his life felt so much heavier than it should have. Burns won, as he always wins. And Homer works at the power plant, as he has always worked at the power plant. Because the deal was struck. Because the system was built. Because the man with the resources decided how the story would go. And the people without resources are still inside the story Burns wrote. Doing the jobs Burns assigned. Living the lives Burns engineered. Unaware. Unable to see it, exactly as he intended. Number. Section 7. The Prediction Engine. How the Simpsons shapes the future rather than forecasting it. Let us talk about the predictions. The idea that a cartoon sitcom from 1989 has been accurately forecasting world events for over 3 decades has become one of the most persistent pieces of American cultural mythology in the modern era. It is discussed on social media as though it were self-evident. Clips from episodes aired 20 and 30 years ago are held up next to contemporary news headlines, and the resemblance is treated as proof of something supernatural, something conspiratorial, something that places The Simpsons in a category beyond ordinary television. Let us walk through the most prominent examples first, and then we are going to do something the viral screenshot compilations never do. We are going to actually think about what these coincidences mean, and what they do not mean, and what the more interesting truth hiding underneath all of this actually is. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future version of the United States in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president. During that episode, Lisa makes a reference to the budget disaster left by her predecessor. The predecessor is identified, in passing, as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 presidential election. 16 years. The internet response when this was rediscovered was proportionate to the coincidence. Screenshots spread across every platform. The Simpsons predicted Trump became a phrase spoken by people who had not thought about the show in years. The clip became one of the most shared pieces of media of the mid-2010s. A show that had made a joke about the absurd trajectory of American celebrity culture in the year 2000 had appeared to correctly identify the specific absurd destination 16 years later. The list goes on, and it goes on for a genuinely long time. In a 1995 episode, a character uses a device that resembles a smartwatch in ways that were not incidental. The show depicted wrist-worn communication technology before the category existed as a consumer product. In a 1994 episode, Homer goes to space as part of a NASA mission alongside Buzz Aldrin, decades before commercial space tourism became a functioning industry. In a 1998 episode, Homer writes an equation on a blackboard that appears, when examined by people with relevant mathematical expertise, to anticipate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which would not be experimentally confirmed until 2012, 14 years later. A 1999 episode proposed that the universe might be shaped like a donut, a toroidal structure, which was, years later, raised as a genuine cosmological possibility based on radiation pattern analysis. In a 1993 episode, a flu virus spreading from Asia reaches Springfield and causes mass panic, hoarding, and a desperate search for treatments 27 years before COVID-19. That same episode includes the incidental release of a swarm of dangerous insects into the surrounding environment, which felt eerily resonant in 2020 when Asian giant hornets arrived in the United States during the actual pandemic. In 1996, an episode included a joke about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years between the joke and the performance it described. In 1998, the show depicted the Disney Corporation acquiring Fox, which actually happened in 2019, more than 20 years after the episode. Across multiple episodes, the show depicted video calling, autocorrect failures, and surveillance culture long before those technologies were embedded in daily life. The list is long enough to sustain its own separate documentary, and people have built exactly that. The question everyone asks is, how did they know? And the people who actually make the show have a consistent answer. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer on The Simpsons for most of its run, addressed this phenomenon directly, and his explanation was blunt. If you throw enough darts, you are going to hit some bullseyes. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak seasons, was even more explicit. Most of what gets labeled a prediction is coincidence, because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself, and because the show has produced so much content that pattern matching becomes inevitable if you look hard enough. That is the official position from inside the show: volume, coincidence, and the cyclical nature of human history. Fact-checking organizations have worked through many of the most popular claimed predictions and found mundane explanations for most of them. The show did not predict a Trump presidency. It observed that Trump had been publicly discussing running for president since the late 1980s, that the trajectory of celebrity culture pointed toward exactly this kind of political outcome, and wrote a joke about where that trajectory led. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. It observed that media consolidation was an accelerating trend and satirized its logical conclusion. The show did not predict smartwatches. It observed that technology was getting smaller and more personal, and imagined what wrist-worn computing might look like. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically been among the most formally educated in television. Multiple writers over the show's run have held degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other institutions with strong programs in mathematics, science, computer science, and political theory. These are not people making random guesses about the future. They are highly educated observers of American culture who have spent careers studying trends, analyzing patterns, and extrapolating current trajectories to their logical and satirical endpoints. They are not predicting, they are reading. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do, and then they are pushing that reading forward a few steps. This is a real skill. It is impressive as a skill, but it is not supernatural. There is also the confirmation bias problem, and it is enormous. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes containing, collectively, tens of thousands of jokes, satirical observations, and cultural references about the trajectory of American life. When you generate that much content over 36 years, and then you run it through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created, which is the contemporary internet, you get a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. The predictions that failed, the jetpacks that never arrived, the political outcomes that went the other way, the technological developments that went nowhere, the cultural shifts that turned out differently than the show imagined, none of those get screenshotted. None of those go viral. Nobody builds a conspiracy theory around the predictions that missed, because confirmation bias only works in one direction. We remember the hits and forget the misses. And when you filter 800 episodes of satirical content through that filter, the result looks like an oracle. It is not an oracle, it is a very good show with a lot of content, filtered through a very powerful bias. But here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the debunking explains most of the predictions. It does not explain all of them. Some coincidences are so specific, so precisely detailed, that statistical probability starts to feel like an inadequate framework. The Trump prediction did not just say a celebrity might run for president someday. It named Trump. It depicted him descending an escalator, and the visual language of that depiction echoes the actual announcement Trump made in 2015, which also featured an escalator descent. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not just joke about exotic animal performers generally. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is almost exactly what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers during a live show. These are not trend extrapolations. These are specific images that align with specific future events in ways that are hard to account for through volume alone. And this is where the meta-theory enters the conversation. The theory that is not about prediction at all, and is more interesting than any conspiracy involving time travel or prophetic writing rooms. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. Not through magic, through cultural influence. The Simpsons is one of the most pervasive, most quoted, most deeply embedded pieces of American media in the history of the medium. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its jokes have entered the American lexicon not as references to a show but as independent units of cultural understanding. Its observations about American life have become part of how Americans understand their own experience. The show has been operating at this level of cultural penetration for long enough that it has stopped being something Americans watch and become something Americans think through. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president in the year 2000, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It gets referenced. It becomes a thing people mention at parties and share with friends and think of when they see Trump on a news segment. The joke does not predict the future. The joke makes the future feel familiar before it arrives. It primes the cultural imagination for a specific outcome by presenting that outcome as an inevitable punchline. And when the punchline finally arrives in the real world, the experience is not one of shock, it is one of recognition. We have seen this before. We knew this was coming. The Simpsons already told us. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. The show made media consolidation feel inevitable by treating it as obvious satire 15 years before it happened. When the merger actually occurred, the cultural response was not shock. It was, of course they did. The Simpsons already told us this was the direction things were heading. The Simpsons does not reflect America. America has become Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and the audience stared into it long enough to start resembling what they saw. The corrupt billionaire who runs the town's most critical infrastructure. The incompetent government that serves his interests rather than the public's. The population too distracted and too cognitively burdened to organize effective resistance. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset. The collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to be made over and over without consequence. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was headed. Springfield is a description of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first, and waited for reality to catch up. And here is the final element that makes the prediction phenomenon genuinely interesting rather than merely coincidental. The Simpsons was not just writing jokes about where America was headed. The Simpsons, through its sustained cultural presence, was contributing to the normalization of the destinations it depicted. It made certain outcomes feel familiar, not dangerous, not alarming, but familiar before they happened. And familiarity is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. We are less resistant to things we feel we have already encountered. We are less shocked by outcomes that feel, when they arrive, like something we have seen before. The predictions are not prophecy. They are the natural byproduct of a show that has been operating at the center of American cultural consciousness for long enough to influence the cultural imagination of its audience. And when you influence the cultural imagination of enough people over enough time, The distance between satire and reality starts to collapse. Not because you predicted anything, but because the things you satirized were taken in, processed, normalized, and made familiar by millions of people who were subsequently less resistant to encountering them in the real world. The Simpsons did not see the future. The Simpsons helped build it. And that is, if you think about it carefully, considerably stranger than any prediction. Number Section 8. The Principal and the Pauper. The episode that revealed how Springfield actually works. September 28, 1997. Season 9, Episode 2. It aired and immediately set off a reaction among the show's fan base that has never fully subsided. 28 years later, this episode remains a point of genuine controversy in serious Simpsons discourse. It has been cited repeatedly as the moment the show broke with its own continuity, the moment the writers stopped caring about internal consistency, the moment the show betrayed the trust of viewers who had invested in its characters over the previous 8 seasons. But what if the critics have been reading the episode backwards? What if this episode did not break The Simpsons? What if it was the one episode honest enough to show you how Springfield actually operates, and the discomfort it produced was the discomfort of recognition rather than betrayal? Here is what happens in the episode. Springfield Elementary holds an event to honor Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger arrives, a man nobody in Springfield recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war during the conflict, presumed dead, and who has now, decades later, managed to escape and return. He came home to find his name and his life already occupied by someone else. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner is revealed to be an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a kid from circumstances that offered him no forward path. He was drafted. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt the weight of that loss personally. He traveled to Springfield to inform Skinner's mother Agnes of her son's death. But when he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. The grief of loss and the immediacy of seeing a young man at her door produced a confusion she did not correct. And Tamzarian, who had never been needed by anyone, who had never had a family or an identity worth inhabiting, went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the history, the relationship with Agnes, and he lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years until the door opened and the real Seymour Skinner walked through it. The truth is fully exposed. Everyone in Springfield knows. Every resident of the community, every parent of every child in the school, everyone who has interacted with Skinner over 2 decades knows that their principal is not who he says he is. The real Skinner is standing in the room. The evidence is not circumstantial. There is no ambiguity. And the town votes on what to do about this. Not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on how to restore the real Skinner's identity and compensate him for the years that were taken from him, on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree. The imposter is, by the authority of the Springfield court, declared to be the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war veteran whose identity was stolen, who spent years in a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his life already filled by someone else, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of unspecified punishment, to ever mention this truth again. Let that sequence of events settle. A community, fully informed, with definitive proof that a major public figure had been operating under a fraudulent identity for 20 years, with the actual victim of that fraud present and willing to testify, made a collective, formal, legally documented decision to suppress the truth rather than acknowledge it. They chose the comfortable fiction over the documented reality. They exiled the truth and criminalized the memory of it. Fans hated this episode. They felt it destroyed Skinner's character by revealing that everything established about him was built on a lie. His relationship with his mother, his military history, his dynamic with Bart, his complex psychology, all of it. Suddenly, the history of a person who does not exist. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Burns, publicly expressed his displeasure with the storyline. Critics consistently place this episode among the worst in the series. It is used as shorthand for the moment the show stopped caring about its own continuity. But here is the argument for looking at this episode differently. The episode is not a failure of continuity, it is a perfect description of Springfield. It is the one episode that shows you the operating mechanism of the town rather than concealing it. The one episode that lets you watch, in real time, how Springfield deals with information that threatens its comfortable self-conception. Because Springfield has always done this. Every time the town experiences a catastrophe, a dome, a sinkhole, a nuclear incident, the sun being blocked, the power plant's violations expose, the reset happens. By the next episode, it is gone. Nobody references it, nobody builds on it. The slate is clean. The standard reading is that this is simply how episodic television works. Stories reset between episodes because that is the format. The Principal and the Pauper offers a different reading. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset, deliberately, through a social contract that is not unspoken, as this episode reveals, but is actually formally enacted through community vote and legal decree. The town does not forget because its residents are absent-minded or because the show's writers are careless. The town forgets because forgetting is the collective decision, made each time, in service of the shared comfort that remembering would destroy. The episode shows you the machinery, the vote, the decree, the physical expulsion of the truth-teller. It makes explicit what every other reset keeps implicit. Springfield's amnesia is not accidental, it is infrastructural. Consider what the full implications of this are. If Springfield operates through collective, deliberate denial, then every impossible thing the show has shown you, and then forgotten: the dome, the nuclear incidents, the biological weapons facility Burns owned, the three-eyed fish, the bones in the basement, none of it was forgotten through negligence. It was forgotten through choice. The community looked at each of these things and made the same decision it made with the real Seymour Skinner. It voted to unknow it, to make the knowing illegal, to remove from the community anyone who insisted on treating the known thing as real. And what the episode makes clear, through the specific case of the real Skinner, is that the expulsion of truth-tellers from Springfield is not a passive process. It is an active one. The real Skinner was not quietly ignored. He was tied to a railroad car and physically transported out of the community. The message was not just that his truth was unwelcome. The message was that his presence, his capacity to speak the truth, was incompatible with the town's continued function. Springfield cannot afford to acknowledge what the power plant is doing. To acknowledge the power plant would mean confronting Burns. To confront Burns would mean dismantling the economic foundation the town depends on. To dismantle that foundation would mean confronting the collapse that follows. So the town does not acknowledge it, not because the residents cannot see it, because seeing it and acknowledging it are two different cognitive acts, and Springfield has learned through mechanisms like the vote in this episode to perform the first without proceeding to the second. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary, a man who arrived with proof that the official narrative was constructed rather than true, and the town's response to him was not gratitude. It was not investigation. It was formalized expulsion, backed by legal authority, with a decree making the memory of his presence a punishable offense. That is not a comedy premise. That is a description of how communities maintain comfortable fictions against the pressure of uncomfortable facts. It happens in real communities. Small towns in particular have a documented capacity for this kind of collective denial. Scandals get buried, crimes get forgotten. The version of events that the community can live with becomes the official version, and the versions the community cannot live with get assigned to people who are no longer present to argue. The Principal and the Pauper is the most honest episode The Simpsons has ever produced, because it is the only episode that shows you the mechanism behind the reset, the machinery that makes every impossible thing that happens in Springfield disposable, the social architecture that allows a town of people showing clear signs of radiation mutation to look at themselves every morning and see perfectly normal Americans going about their perfectly normal lives in a perfectly normal town that just happens to glow faintly near the river. And if the coma theory is true, the episode takes on one more layer. If Homer is dreaming, if everything since 1993 is his unconscious mind trying to hold a world together, then Homer's dreaming brain invented a scenario where an entire town votes to sustain a lie, because Homer needs to believe that is possible. He needs to believe that you can live inside a constructed version of reality for long enough that the construction becomes indistinguishable from the truth. He needs to believe that lies, maintained collectively with sufficient will, can replace what actually happened. Because that is what the coma is, a constructed version of his life, sustained by his dying brain, with the real world locked outside. And as long as nobody inside the dream questions the construction, as long as Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up into the reality of how much time has passed. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And the real Seymour Skinner is out there somewhere, tied to a train, exiled from his own name. The last honest man in a town that made honesty criminal. Number, Section 9. Where is Springfield? The geography, conspiracy, and the town that cannot be found. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in the history of American television. More Americans can name Springfield than can name the capital of at least a third of the 50 states. The town has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire that has been burning for over a decade, a gorge, a harbor, a monorail, an elementary school that is perpetually underfunded, a prison, 2 hospitals of varying competence, and a convenience store that serves as the social hub of one of its most memorable characters. It has mountains within driving distance and ocean access and desert terrain and farmland and forest, sometimes visible within the same establishing shot. It also borders the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. Springfield does not exist in any single American state. Springfield, as the show has constructed it across 36 seasons of deliberate geographic contradiction, exists in all of them simultaneously, or in none of them, or in some impossible space that American geography does not have a category for. It is located on the coast and in the heartland and near the Canadian border, and close enough to Mexico that border crossings have been plot relevant. Its weather ranges from blizzards to tropical heat waves within the span of a single broadcast season. And every time a clue appears that seems to narrow the location down to a specific region, another clue appears in the next episode that contradicts it completely. The show has been doing this deliberately and consistently for its entire run. Matt Groening, the show's creator, appeared to settle the question definitively in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon. He grew up near Springfield, Oregon. He chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, and he liked the generic, anywhere quality of it. The mystery was solved. Springfield was in Oregon. It was solved for approximately 48 hours. Episodes continued airing after the interview. Those episodes placed Springfield in geographic contexts that were inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not treat Groening's confession as a canonical ruling on the show's internal geography. They kept doing what they had always done, which is contradict every firm answer with a new, incompatible detail in the following episode. The mystery was officially solved, and the show immediately began generating new evidence against the official solution. This is not an accident. This is the show's most consistent long-term creative decision, sustained across 36 years and hundreds of individual writing rooms and multiple generational turnovers in the show's staff. Nobody has ever committed to a specific Springfield location, despite endless opportunities to do so, because the decision to never commit is the decision that was made at the beginning and has been honored ever since. The surface explanation is the one Groening himself offered, and that the show's writers have confirmed across many interviews. Springfield is designed to be universal. It is designed to feel like the town you grew up in, regardless of which town you actually grew up in. Making it a specific, identifiable American location would break the universality. If Springfield is definitively in Ohio, then viewers from California and Texas and New York experience a slight geographical displacement that nudges the town from feeling like their town into feeling like somewhere else's town. The ambiguity is the point. Springfield belongs to everyone because it belongs nowhere in particular. This is true. This is genuine creative intent, documented by the people who made the show. The geographic ambiguity serves a real artistic purpose. But place it alongside the theories we have been building throughout this video and it starts to mean something additional. Under the radiation framework, there is a darker reading. If the contamination from the Springfield nuclear power plant has been severe enough to physically mutate the town's population over decades, if it has been severe enough to alter human biology in the ways we have documented in Section 1, why would its effects stop at biology? The radiation theory, taken to its extreme, suggests that what the plant has been doing to the people of Springfield, it has also been doing to the physical environment of Springfield. The town's impossible geography, its simultaneous access to mountains and oceans and deserts and Arctic weather systems, is not a continuity error. It is contamination. The radiation has warped the spatial landscape around the town the way it has warped the biological landscape of the town's residents. Springfield has both mountains and coast because the contamination has compressed or distorted the geography surrounding it in ways that have no parallel in uncontaminated American territory. This sounds like a stretch until you consider that the show already asks you to accept, as canonical fact, that a nuclear facility has been producing radiation significant enough to cause three-eyed fish, glowing rats, visible bioluminescence in human beings, and what appears to be a population-wide mutation of consistent characteristics. If you have already accepted that the radiation does all of that to biology, accepting that it might also affect the physical geography surrounding the source is a smaller additional step than it first appears. Under the coma theory, the geography has an even cleaner explanation. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise cartographic memory of the United States. It has emotional impressions, fragments of every landscape he has ever seen or visited or encountered in media. Mountains from a family vacation, ocean from a commercial he saw on television, desert from a movie, farmland from driving through the middle of the country. His unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever absorbed, layering them on top of each other according to emotional logic rather than geographic fact. Because dreams do not obey geography, they obey feeling. And Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's fractured, incomplete, unconsciously organized memory of America. It is not a real place with real coordinates. It is a feeling of place, assembled from shards. And under the collective denial framework introduced by the principal and the pauper, the geography serves a specific strategic function. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find on a map. You cannot bring regulatory action against a nuclear facility if the state in which it is located changes depending on which episode you are watching. You cannot establish consistent federal jurisdiction over a community that exists in geographic superposition. Springfield's location is undefined, and that undefinition is not a production convenience. It is a legal shield. A town with no fixed location has no fixed regulatory authority, no permanent state attorney general to open an investigation into the plant, no consistent EPA regional office with established jurisdiction, no senator or governor with a definitive claim on the community's welfare and therefore a definitive obligation to act on its behalf. Springfield floats between states because floating is more survivable than landing. Landing means a specific regulatory body gains authority. Landing means someone shows up with a badge and established jurisdiction and starts asking about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the bones in the basement. As long as Springfield has no fixed address, it also has no fixed accountability. And the system, Burns's system, the system that depends on the plant continuing to operate in violation of 342 safety standards, benefits enormously from that ambiguity. There is a moment in the show's history where Springfield's location was briefly, apparently, officially resolved. In the 12th season mockumentary episode called Behind the Laughter, in which the Simpsons family is presented as a real family who served as the inspiration for the animated show, the narrator states that the family is from Northern Kentucky. For the original broadcast, that was the answer. Northern Kentucky. Springfield had a state. In syndicated reruns, the line was changed. A different state was named. The answer that had been officially delivered in the original broadcast was quietly replaced with a different answer for all subsequent airings. Springfield's location, in the one episode where it was given a definitive statement, was given two contradictory definitive statements depending on which version of the episode you watched. The truth depends on where you encountered it. And in Springfield, the truth has always depended on where you are standing when you look for it. Every American state has been theorized as Springfield's home at some point. Every theory has evidence in its favor and evidence against it. The show has created a state of permanent geographic ambiguity so thoroughly that it cannot be resolved without contradicting something the show has already established. And the show has been generating that contradictory evidence for 36 years with what appears to be deliberate, systematic intent. Springfield will not be located, not because the show cannot decide, because the show decided, a long time ago, that Springfield is more powerful as a question than it would ever be as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. And a town that belongs to everyone has a kind of civic permanence that no specific geographic location can provide. You cannot shut down a town that does not appear on a map. You cannot hold accountable a community that cannot be precisely identified. You cannot end a story that refuses to be pinned to a single place in the world and therefore becomes, paradoxically, present in every place at once. Springfield is not in Oregon. Springfield is not in Kentucky. Springfield is not in Ohio or Nevada or Maine or any of the other states that have been proposed with varying degrees of canonical support. Springfield is everywhere Americans recognize themselves. And that is, ultimately, the only answer the show was ever going to give. Number, Section 10. The floating timeline. Why nobody ages, why it matters, and what it says about us. Bart Simpson was 10 years old in 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa Simpson was 8 in 1989. She is 8 right now. Maggie was 1 year old. She is still 1. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s. They remain, across 36 years of broadcast television, in their mid-30s. Not a single candle has been added to anyone's birthday cake. Not one school grade has been completed. Not one milestone of human development has been achieved and left behind. The characters of The Simpsons exist in a state of temporal suspension so complete and so consistent that it has become the defining formal characteristic of the show. The entertainment industry term for this is a floating timeline. The present of the show is always calibrated to match the present of the viewer. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. The technology changes, the cultural references change, the year changes, but the characters do not. They remain locked in the ages at which the show introduced them, living perpetually in whatever moment happens to be now. Most animated shows use some version of this approach. It is a standard production convention. Characters who do not age do not create the continuity complications that aging characters produce. The writers do not have to track developmental milestones. Stories can be told without worrying about whether they fit into a specific temporal framework. The floating timeline is, in a purely practical sense, a tool for keeping long-running episodic storytelling manageable. The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has started to produce contradictions so large that they have become their own story. The most visible example is Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their history was anchored in the 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. Their courtship played out against a backdrop of specific, era-appropriate music, fashion, and cultural context. Homer's long hair and flashbacks, Marge's prom dress. Their whole origin story had a period feeling that was consistent with parents in their mid-30s in the late 1980s. But as the floating timeline dragged the show's present forward, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1980. They met in approximately 2005. Their high school experience was not shaped by Watergate and the aftermath of Vietnam. It was shaped by early social media and the expansion of reality television. The show has acknowledged this shift explicitly. Later flashback episodes have depicted Homer and Marge's youth as taking place in the 1990s, then the 2000s, then later still. Their origin story has been told at least 4 different times, each version placing their formative years in a different decade and adjusting the cultural references accordingly. This means Homer and Marge do not have a fixed past. They have an approximation of a past that is recalibrated as needed by each new episode that requires a flashback. Their memories are not stable. Their origin story is a document that the show keeps revising to fit the current needs of the floating timeline. And the show treats this as normal because within the logic of how it operates, it is normal. Characters in a floating timeline do not have histories. They have whatever history is contextually appropriate at the moment the story requires one. Now apply every theory we have discussed in this video to this central fact. Every theory arrives at the same destination through a different path. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen memory of a man who went unconscious in April of 1993. His dreaming mind cannot age them because it cannot imagine what they have become in the years he has been asleep. It can only simulate the versions of them that existed at the moment the vending machine fell. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their biology has been so fundamentally altered by decades of chronic nuclear contamination that the normal cellular processes governing aging have been disrupted at the molecular level. The mutation that changed the shape of their bodies and the color of their skin also, somewhere in the cascade of biological effects, altered the rate at which those bodies accumulate the damage we recognize as aging. The collective denial theory says nobody ages because Springfield has agreed, through the same formal and informal mechanisms revealed in The Principal and the Pauper, that aging is one of the truths the community cannot afford to acknowledge. If Bart turns 11, the conversation about why the kid who has been 10 for 36 years is suddenly 11 begins. And that conversation, followed honestly, ends in places Springfield cannot go. The Burns immortality theory adds another dimension. If one person in Springfield has definitively beaten the aging process through medical engineering, the concept of aging is already established as negotiable within this universe. Burns does not age on the normal human schedule because he has built the infrastructure to prevent it. The question of whether the town around him has been subjected to similar, if less controlled, effects through exposure to the same radiation that sustains Burns's own altered biology is not a question the show is willing to answer. But it is a question the show has been implicitly raising since Blinky surfaced in Season 2. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this explicitly, more than once. The Season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding is the most sustained example. A flash forward to a future where Lisa is in her early 20s, engaged to be married, fully formed as the person the show has always suggested she would become. The episode is detailed and emotionally rich. It is not a brief sketch. It is a full portrait of a future Springfield and the people who have grown into it. It works beautifully. It proves that the show can do this. It proves that the writers are capable of imagining their characters at different ages and finding the material to make those imagined futures compelling. And then it closes. Lisa returns to being 8 years old. The future is locked away again. The permanent present resumes as though the glimpse did not occur. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. That refusal is not a limitation. It is a choice. And it is a choice that means something beyond the practical conveniences of the floating timeline format. Because The Simpsons is not just a show about one family. The Simpsons is the American family. They have occupied that symbolic position for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. For 36 years, Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie have been the version of the American domestic unit that the culture returns to as a reference point, as a mirror, as a way of seeing itself. And the American family, as The Simpsons depicts it and as the culture needs it to be depicted, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must always be middle-aged. Marge must always be patient. Bart must always be rebellious. Lisa must always be idealistic. Maggie must always be silent. The dynamic must be preserved because the dynamic is the thing the culture is actually watching for. Not the plots, not the guest appearances, not the couch gags, the family, the structure, the assurance that the family is still there and still functional and still together. The moment the Simpson family ages, everything that the show has been for 36 years has to become something else. The moment Bart goes to college, the conversation about what Bart becomes as an adult has to happen. The moment Lisa moves away from Springfield, the question of what her departure means for the family she left behind has to be faced. The moment Maggie starts speaking in full sentences, the wall she has built through 3 decades of strategic silence begins to come down. The moment Homer retires and Marge is left in a house that is slowly becoming too large for just the two of them, the comedy of domestic dysfunction starts shading into something that looks a lot more like an elegy. And America does not want the elegy. America wants the couch gag. America wants the theme music and the family running from different directions and converging on the sofa in the same formation they have been converging on it since 1989. America wants the assurance that in Springfield, on Evergreen Terrace, in the house at the end of the street, the family is intact. The kids are young, the beer is cold, the loop is running. The floating timeline is not a narrative device. It is a thesis statement. It is the show telling you what it believes about the relationship between the American audience and the American family. We have frozen The Simpsons in time because we need them frozen. Because they represent something we cannot afford to let change. Something about who we think we are. Something about the version of ourselves we need to believe is still possible. The show has shown us futures where the children grow up. The show keeps pulling those futures back. We are the ones who keep pulling. Every time we watch, every time we laugh, every time we share a clip from an episode that aired before most of us were born, we tighten the loop. We make it a little harder for The Simpsons to escape the amber they have been preserved in since the night Homer did not wake up from his coma. The loop is not their prison, it is ours. We built it, we maintain it, and every Sunday night we tune in to make sure the walls are still standing. Because if the walls come down, if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9, and Maggie finally says her second word and means it, then the show ends. And the show ending means admitting something we would rather not admit. That 36 years have passed. That we are older. That the couch we sat on as kids watching the opening credits for the first time is gone now, or in someone else's house. That the world the show was satirizing in 1989 is not the same world it is satirizing now. That time moved, while Springfield stayed still. And as long as The Simpsons is on, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the front door after another impossible day, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down. We can turn on the television. We can go home to Evergreen Terrace, to Springfield, to the family that never changes, in the town that never ages, in the show that never ends. The Simpsons are not trapped in the loop. We are. They are just the ones we watch inside it. Number Section 11. Ned Flanders, Hans Moleman, and the hidden tragedies that the show cannot stop telling. Let us end where the show always ends. Not with Burns, not with the conspiracy, not with the nuclear plant or the coma or the shooting or the floating timeline. Let us end with the people who live around the edges of the Simpson family. The ones the show treats as secondary. The ones whose stories, when you actually look at them, turn out to be the strangest and saddest in all of Springfield. We start with Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know Hans Moleman. He is small, he is elderly, he wears glasses so thick that his eyes are barely visible behind them. He shuffles through the background of Springfield scenes, moving slowly, speaking quietly, existing on the margins of other people's stories. And he dies. He dies regularly across decades of canonical episodes in ways that range from darkly comic to genuinely disturbing, and then he appears in the next episode completely unaffected by whatever killed him last time. Hans Moleman has been hit by vehicles. He has been buried alive. He has been crushed by falling objects. He has been eaten by animals. He has been struck by lightning. He has walked into traffic and not walked out. He has been set on fire. By the most conservative accounting, he is the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation, and not in the non-canonical safety of a Treehouse of Horror episode. In regular, canonical, continuity-bearing episodes of The Simpsons that are supposed to count, most viewers accept this as a running gag. Moleman dies a lot. The show thinks this is funny. Do not overthink it. Move on. But Moleman once stated his age as 31 years old. 31. He appears to be in his 80s. He moves with the fragility of someone whose body has been through experiences that normal human bodies are not designed to survive. His eyesight has deteriorated so severely that functional independence seems like a generous description of his daily life. If Moleman is telling the truth about his age and within the show's logic, there is no established reason for him to lie about it, then something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man in his early 30s and produced a physical presentation that is decades beyond his biological age. Something that also, apparently, made him resistant to final death in a way that no other character in the show experiences quite so consistently. Under the radiation framework, Moleman represents the far end of the spectrum that begins with the mutations we identified in Section 1. If the plant's contamination affects different individuals in different ways, producing everything from Maggie's extraordinary intelligence to Homer's catastrophic cognitive impairment, then Moleman represents an extreme case. A man whose exposure produced such a severe acceleration of biological aging that it compressed decades of deterioration into what should have been his peak years. He is physically an elderly man. But chronologically, he is 31. The radiation did not kill him. It did something arguably worse. It aged him past the point where his body could sustain the normal processes of daily life, while simultaneously making him resistant to the final consequences of that deterioration. He exists in a biological state where the mechanisms of death cannot gain full traction every time they do. He comes back, reconstituted, ready for the next round. The plant's runoff did not just mutate Moleman, it put him in a loop from which he cannot exit. If the coma theory applies, Moleman is something different. He is a background process in Homer's dream, a filler character. The unconscious mind does not maintain minor characters with the same fidelity it maintains the people it loves. Molman appears when the dream needs him and dies when the dream no longer requires him in that scene, and then he reappears in the next scene because the dream needs a figure of that type to populate the background. He is not a person in Homer's dream. He is furniture that the dream occasionally breaks and reassembles. If the collective denial framework applies, Molman's deaths are simply one more thing Springfield has voted not to see. A man dies in public, repeatedly, in front of witnesses, in situations where anyone paying attention would be alarmed, and nobody calls for an investigation. Nobody convenes a medical panel. Nobody asks how the same individual keeps dying and keeps returning. The town has added Molman's death cycle to the long list of things it has formally decided not to notice, along with the three-eyed fish, along with the bones in the basement, along with the man who glows in the dark. These are not anomalies that Springfield fails to notice. They are truths that Springfield has decided, through the mechanism we watched operate in real time during The Principal and the Pauper, to officially unknow. Now we turn to Ned Flanders. And this is where the show gets quietly brutal in a way that has no parallel in its history. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer is not. He is patient, kind, generous, devoutly religious, financially responsible, physically fit, a committed father, and a reliably supportive neighbor. He is better than Homer by virtually every measurable metric. He tries harder. He contributes more. He is thoughtful where Homer is reflexive, deliberate where Homer is impulsive, consistent where Homer is chaotic. If you were building the ideal neighbor, the person you would most want living next door, the person whose presence in the community would make the community measurably better, you would build Ned Flanders. And the show punishes him, relentlessly, creatively, without remorse. His wife Maud was killed at the Springfield Speedway. A t-shirt cannon misfired. The shirts were aimed at Homer, who was dodging them to avoid the minor inconvenience of being hit with free fabric. The shirts hit Maud instead, knocking her off the bleachers. Homer's selfishness, not even his malice, his ordinary, reflexive, completely characteristic selfishness, killed the woman Ned had built his life around. And Ned forgave Homer, because that is what Ned does. He forgives, he absorbs the punishment, and turns the other cheek and responds with grace, because that is the only response his psychology allows. That last detail is the key, because in an episode where a hurricane destroys Ned's house and the community rebuilds it so incompetently that it immediately collapses, Ned breaks. He has a psychological crisis so complete and so sustained that it requires institutional intervention. He says things to the people of Springfield, honest things he has been holding for years that constitute one of the most genuine eruptions of suppressed emotion in the show's history. And then he is taken to a mental health facility. At the facility, the show reveals something that recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about Ned. His relentless positivity is not a natural temperament. It is the result of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, ideologically opposed to discipline, responded by taking him to a psychiatrist who spent years systematically conditioning the aggression out of him through intensive behavioral therapy. The process worked. The anger was suppressed. The kindness was installed. Ned Flanders, as the world knows him, is not who Ned Flanders was born as. He is a construct built by behavioral reprogramming over a childhood he had no say in. This changes the reading of every scene involving Ned in the entire series. His patience with Homer is not saintly, it is pathological. His nervous system was conditioned, before he was old enough to meaningfully consent, to suppress aggressive responses regardless of the provocation. He cannot be angry at Homer for killing Maud because his brain was wired, by a person with a medical license, to make that emotional response inaccessible. His forgiveness is not a moral achievement. It is the programmed output of a behavioral modification protocol applied to a child. His faith is not a source of genuine spiritual comfort and strength. It is a coping framework that a conditioned adult uses to explain why he continues to suffer despite doing everything correctly. His belief that God has a plan provides the intellectual structure needed to make continued compliance with a life that keeps delivering loss feel tolerable. Without that structure, the accumulating evidence of his experience would become impossible to rationalize. His wife is dead. His house has been destroyed. His neighbor, the person most directly responsible for multiple of his worst experiences, faces no meaningful consequences for anything. The theology of divine plan is the only framework that makes all of this bearable. And here's the detail that crystallizes Ned's situation into something beyond comedy. God talks to Homer. This is established canonical fact in the Simpsons universe. Homer has had direct, face-to-face conversations with God on multiple occasions. God visits Homer. God addresses Homer's specific situation. God tells Homer things. The drunk who falls asleep in church, the man with an IQ of 55, the person whose spiritual practice consists largely of avoiding it whenever possible, receives divine attention and engagement. Ned Flanders, who attends church without exception, who reads scripture, who structures his entire life around a sincere effort to honor the values his faith prescribes, who prays with apparent genuine conviction, who has devoted himself to his relationship with God more thoroughly than any other character in Springfield, Ned gets silence. God talks to Homer and ignores Ned. The show has established this, and the show does not present it as an injustice or an anomaly. It presents it as the way things are, as part of the natural order of Springfield. And that, in the context of everything else we have established about how Springfield works, is a thesis statement. The system does not reward rightness. The system rewards compliance, usefulness, and the kind of damage that makes you easy to manage. Homer is useful to Burns because he is broken. Ned is useful to the community because he can be counted on to absorb whatever is required of him and respond with patience. Neither of them is rewarded in any meaningful sense. But at least Homer gets the dream. At least Homer gets the coma-generated illusion of a life that keeps working out. Ned gets the waking reality of doing everything right in a system that has no mechanism for rewarding the people who do everything right. Ned Flanders is the saddest character in The Simpsons. Not Homer, whose cognitive impairment protects him from the full weight of his situation. Not Lisa, who is young enough to still believe that the world can be different from what it is. Not Burns, who is too insulated by wealth and power to experience the consequences of the system he runs. Ned, the man who was reprogrammed as a child to be good, and who has spent his entire adult life being good, in a town that punishes goodness and rewards the absence of it, and who cannot even be angry about this because the anger was conditioned out of him before he was old enough to know what he was giving up. Homer Simpson and Ned Flanders have lived next door to each other for 36 years. They have been neighbors for the entirety of the show's existence. And in 36 years, the gap between them, the gap between the man who does everything wrong and the man who does everything right has never meaningfully closed. Because the system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer in Sector 7G and Ned in the pew, and Burns at the top of the tower, and Molman in the ground, and everyone exactly where the machine needs them to be, forever. In a loop that does not break, on a floating timeline that does not land. That is Springfield. Not a quirky, animated town full of eccentric characters doing funny things to each other across 36 seasons of television. A system, a machine, a carefully engineered arrangement of people and institutions, and economic pressures, and environmental contamination, and collective denial that produces specific outcomes with extraordinary consistency. Homer stays employed. Burns stays alive. The plant stays operational. The violations continue. The water stays contaminated. The people stay manageable, the timeline stays floating, and the loop runs on. The theories we have explored across these 11 sections are different. They use different evidence and different logic, and make different assumptions about what The Simpsons is trying to say. The radiation theory, the coma, the shooting, the immortality, the silence of Maggie, the conspiracy of Mona's exile, the prediction engine, the collective denial, the geographic impossibility, the temporal suspension, the quiet devastation of Ned Flanders. These are different lenses aimed at the same subject, but every lens arrives at the same image. Something is wrong in Springfield, something structural, something that goes deeper than animation style or episodic format or the accumulated continuity errors of 36 years of production. Whether it is the radiation or the dream or the vote or the billionaire's engineered survival or some combination of all of it, the rules that govern the rest of the world do not fully apply here. Time does not pass normally. Bodies do not age or die normally. Consequences do not stick normally. Truths that threaten comfort get formally expelled. The people in charge stay in charge. The people without power stay without it. And the loop runs on because the loop was built to run on, by people who benefit from its continued operation and who have spent a century making sure the people inside it cannot see the structure from where they stand. The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It has never hidden them. Every single thing we have discussed in this video is visible in the show if you are willing to look at it as evidence rather than as animation. The three-eyed fish. The bones in the basement, the glowing man in the woods, the coma that lost 5%, the baby who checked to make sure no one was watching, the mother who kissed her son goodbye in the dark and did not come back for 27 years, the town that voted to make the truth illegal. The show has been showing you all of this since the very first episode. It has been patient about it. It has embedded it in jokes and background details and throwaway lines, and moments that flash by so quickly you barely register them before the next joke arrives. It has trusted that someday someone would sit down and pay attention to what it has been building. And the thing it has been building, across nearly 800 episodes and 36 seasons, is not a comedy. It is a portrait of a family that was broken before the story began, in a town that was poisoned before anyone thought to check the water, by a system that was designed to maintain itself regardless of what it cost the people inside it. A portrait of the ways that ordinary people survive in environments that are not designed for their survival. The ways they love each other in spite of everything. The ways they come home at the end of the episode not because everything is fine, but because home is what they have, and what they have is worth coming back to. Homer Simpson is not a buffoon. He is a man who was broken by forces he never had the capacity to identify, who chose the fog over the clarity because the clarity was unbearable, and who goes back to Evergreen Terrace every night because the people there are his and he is theirs, and that is the only truth that has not been contaminated. Marge Simpson is not a patient housewife enduring a difficult husband. She is the gravitational center of a family that should have fallen apart 30 years ago, holding it together through a combination of love and stubbornness and a fundamental unwillingness to let the system win. Bart is not a delinquent. He is the only sane response to a world that has stopped making sense. His rebellion is not nihilism. It is diagnosis. Lisa is not a moralistic prig. She is 8 years old, and she has correctly identified everything wrong with the world around her, and she cannot stop speaking about it, and she is completely alone in that. She is the most honest character in Springfield. And Springfield, as we now know, treats honesty as a criminal offense. And Maggie is not the baby. Maggie is the one who has been watching all of this from the beginning, who understood before the rest of us what it cost to be seen in Springfield, and who made the only rational decision available to a person of her intelligence in a town of this character. She went quiet. She went still. She went invisible. She is watching. She is waiting. For what, exactly, the show has never told us. But when she finally moves, when she finally speaks, when she finally decides that the moment has arrived and the waiting is over, Springfield Conville will not know what hit it. And honestly, neither will we. That is Springfield. That is the show. That is 4 hours of wild theories, 276 episodes of embedded evidence, 36 years of a loop that has never broken, the longest-running animated series in American history, the most analyzed show in television, the most theorized, most dissected, most obsessively examined piece of media that the medium has ever produced. And the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. After all the radiation and all the comas and all the shootings and all the immortality and all the silence and all the predictions and all the collective denial after all of it, why cannot we let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Springfield is our town and Homer is our father and Marge is our mother and Bart is who we wanted to be when we were 10. And Lisa is who we should have been. And maybe still could be if we were willing to keep fighting. And Maggie is the part of us that went quiet a long time ago, watching everything, waiting for the right moment, holding something enormous behind a patient and unreadable expression. Or maybe it is simpler. Maybe we cannot let them go because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older, that the world has changed in ways we did not fully vote for, that the couch we sat on as kids watching the opening credits for the first time is in a different house now, or not a house at all. And as long as The Simpsons is on, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8, and Homer is stumbling through the front door covered in whatever the day deposited on him, and the family is there, intact, accounted for, waiting, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down. We can turn on the television. We can go home. And Springfield will be there, as it always is, as it always will be, because that is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Number, Section 12. The deeper architecture. What Springfield's institutions tell us about the system controlling it. Every town has institutions. Schools, churches, hospitals, police departments, courts. The institutions exist to serve the population and to maintain the basic functions of organized communal life. They are, in theory, the mechanisms through which a community governs itself, protects its members, and transmits its values across generations. In Springfield, the institutions are broken. All of them. Not randomly broken, not broken through incompetence alone, but broken in a specific, consistent direction. Every institution in Springfield fails its residents in ways that ultimately benefit the person at the top of the power hierarchy. And that direction of failure is not accidental. Let us start with the police department. Chief Clancy Wiggum is, by any objective professional standard, one of the most incompetent law enforcement officers ever depicted in any medium. He solves crimes only when the solution falls directly into his lap. He misses evidence that is visible to anyone paying attention. He pursues investigations in ways that consistently manage to avoid implicating the most powerful people in Springfield. He is corruptible in ways that require minimal effort from the person doing the corrupting. He is overweight, underprepared, strategically inept, and surrounded by a department that reflects his own level of capability. But consider what Wiggum's incompetence actually produces as an outcome. In a town where a nuclear facility has been operating with 342 safety violations and dumping radioactive waste into the water supply, a functioning police department would be a problem. A functioning police department would respond to the evidence that keeps surfacing: the three-eyed fish, the bones in the basement, the luminous rats, the human population displaying physical anomalies consistent with radiation exposure by opening investigations and generating pressure on the facility's owner. A competent chief of police, even without direct evidence of Burns's specific violations, would create institutional friction that would make Burns's operations more difficult to sustain. Wiggum does not create that friction. Wiggum cannot create that friction. And this is not because Wiggum is a passive presence. The show establishes that he is actively corruptible and that his investigations reliably reach conclusions that are convenient for the people who most need law enforcement to. Look the other way. The judicial system follows the same pattern. Judge Snyder, who delivers the decree in The Principal and the Pauper, is the clearest illustration of what the Springfield court system actually does. When the truth threatened the town's comfortable functioning, Snyder did not weigh the evidence and arrive at a just conclusion. He formalized the community's preference for comfortable fiction over documented fact and gave it the force of law. The court system in Springfield does not deliver justice. It delivers the outcomes that the community's power structure requires. The school system. Springfield Elementary is perpetually underfunded. Its budget repeatedly raided for purposes that have nothing to do with education. Its administrative leadership occupied by a man who is not who he claims to be and who exercises authority through a combination of genuine institutional commitment and the psychological framework of someone who was desperate enough for belonging to inhabit a stolen identity for 20 years. Principal Skinner Tamzarian is not a villain, but he is an administrator running an institution that exists in a condition of permanent inadequacy, and the inadequacy is sustained because adequately funding Springfield Elementary would require Burns to acknowledge that the oil well beneath it belonged to the school. The school system fails because Burns needed the oil well. The court system fails because the community needs its fictions confirmed. The police force fails because effective law enforcement would create problems for people who benefit from the current lack of it. Each institutional failure serves a specific function within the larger system. None of it is random. The hospital deserves particular attention. Springfield General appears across dozens of episodes, and it is a facility that somehow manages to be simultaneously the location of extraordinary medical incompetence and the place where Burns accesses the treatments that keep him alive. The same building that routinely misdiagnoses Springfield residents, performs procedures incorrectly, and fails to detect basic conditions, including, apparently, a crayon lodged in a patient's brain across decades of care, also maintains a medical operation sophisticated enough to manage the weekly radiation protocol that sustains a man who is arguably the most biologically unusual patient in the country. This is not a contradiction. This is a feature of how the hospital functions. The medical establishment in Springfield operates at a level of competence calibrated to serve the needs of the person who has the resources to ensure it operates the way he requires. Burns gets the sophisticated intervention. The rest of Springfield gets Dr. Nick. The show has never depicted this as a deliberate conspiracy so explicit that it demands direct acknowledgement. It has not needed to. The pattern is visible across the canonical episodes for anyone willing to observe it. Every institution in Springfield functions, or fails to function, in ways that produce outcomes favorable to the same small set of interests. The police do not investigate the plant. The courts confirm whatever the powerful need confirmed. The schools are underfunded. The hospital serves Burns's medical needs at a level of sophistication it does not extend to ordinary patients. The media, the Springfield shopper, Channel 6 News reports on Springfield events in ways that consistently manage to avoid the story that would be most harmful to the person most capable of making their lives difficult. The media dimension is particularly telling. Channel 6 News in Springfield is television journalism at its most performative. Brockman's delivery is a perfect parody of empty gravitas. The stories covered, the angles taken, the questions not asked, all of it reflects the priorities of a media operation that has learned, through whatever combination of explicit pressure and implicit self-preservation, not to pursue the stories that would require confronting the most powerful person in town. Burns blocked out the sun. This happened. The entire town lost direct sunlight for a period because the richest man in Springfield decided that his financial interests required it. The media covered this. The coverage was exactly what you would expect from a media environment that knows its relationship with Burns and has calculated, consciously or otherwise, the cost of reporting on him in a way that would create genuine accountability. Every broken institution in Springfield traces back to the same source. Not because Burns personally designed each failure, though his direct influence is evident in many of them, but because the conditions he has created in Springfield, the economic dependency on the plant, the cognitive damage from the radiation, the culture of collective denial, the institutional calibration toward comfortable outcomes have produced a self-sustaining system in which the institutions fail in the specific direction that benefits him without requiring his active management of each failure. He built the conditions. The conditions produce the outcomes, and he can sit in his office above the town and watch the machinery run. This is how durable power actually operates in the real world, which is part of what makes Springfield's institutional failure feel uncomfortably recognizable. Durable power rarely requires direct control of each individual mechanism. It requires establishing the conditions under which the mechanisms, operating according to their own internal incentives, naturally produce favorable outcomes. Burns does not personally manage Wiggum's incompetence. He does not need to. Wiggum's institutional position, his personal character, and the general environment of Springfield produce an investigation style that serves Burns's interests without Burns having to do anything about it specifically. The most sophisticated aspect of the system Burns operates is this: it is self-reproducing. The population that the radiation has made cognitively impaired is the same population that staffs the institutions that fail to address the radiation. The people whose judgment has been compromised by decades of contaminated water are the same people voting in Springfield's elections, staffing its police department, sitting in its courts, writing for its newspapers. The system that produces the institutional failures is the same system that impairs the population's capacity to recognize and resist those failures. It is a closed loop that reinforces itself at every level. Springfield cannot save itself from Burns, because Burns built the conditions that prevent Springfield from saving itself. The contamination impairs the population. The impaired population staffs and elects the institutions. The institutions fail in the direction that serves Burns. The failures sustain the conditions that cause the contamination to continue. And Burns sits at the top of the loop, the one element of the system with access to the medical intervention that allows him to operate above the conditions he created. He is not just the most powerful person in Springfield. He is the person who built the machine that keeps him powerful. And the machine runs on the people inside it, who cannot see the machine because the machine has already compromised their ability to look clearly at what surrounds them. This is the theory that ties everything together. Not any single element, not the radiation alone, not the coma alone, not the shooting or the immortality or the geographic impossibility or the floating timeline alone. It is the system, the specific, deliberately constructed, self-reinforcing system that Charles Montgomery Burns has been building and maintaining for over a century. The system that keeps Homer in Sector 7G, and Ned in the pew, and Molman in the ground, and the timeline floating, and Springfield exactly as it has always been. The show has been showing you this system for 36 years. Every episode is a frame, every frame is evidence. And the picture they compose, taken together, is one of the most carefully constructed portraits of institutional power in the history of American popular culture. hidden inside a cartoon about a family that cannot stop falling down and getting back up? Because that is what the system requires. Something funny enough that the audience keeps watching. Something warm enough that the audience keeps caring. Something familiar enough that the audience keeps coming back. And something true enough that somewhere underneath the jokes and the couch gags and the celebrity cameos and the comet, the dome, the shooting, the coma, the bones in the basement, and the glowing man in the woods, somewhere underneath all of that, the audience knows. They know something is wrong in Springfield. They have always known. They just cannot quite stop watching long enough to say it out loud. Number closing. What the theories actually tell us. We spent a long time in Springfield today. We pulled at the threads and found patterns. We treated the show's evidence as evidence rather than as jokes with incidental continuity, and what we found underneath was a version of Springfield that is darker and more coherent and more carefully constructed than the surface version that 36 seasons of Sunday night broadcasts have delivered. The radiation theory, the coma, the Burns shooting, the immortality, Maggie's silence, the three-generation conspiracy of Mona's exile, the prediction engine, the principle and the pauper and the machinery of collective denial, the geographic impossibility, the floating timeline, Ned Flanders's programmed goodness, and Hans Molemann's endless deaths, and the institutional failures that serve the same master every time. These are not disconnected curiosities. They are pieces of a single argument that the show has been making since its first season. The argument is this: Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. It is a contamination zone populated by people whose capacity for recognizing their own situation has been systematically compromised by the same source that contaminated the physical environment they live in. The institutions that should protect them have been calibrated to serve the interests of the person whose operations produce the contamination. The collective psychology of the community has been trained, through repeated cycles of crisis and reset, to treat the forgetting of inconvenient truths as a civic virtue rather than a cognitive failure. And the man at the center of all of it has been alive for over a century, maintained by weekly radiation treatments that his own facility's contamination made necessary, watching the loop run. Every theory points at the same machine. They use different evidence and different logic, and arrive at different specific conclusions about which mechanism is primary. But every one of them arrives at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield, something fundamental, something that goes deeper than animation style or production convention, or the accumulated continuity errors of 36 years of television. And the show has been showing you this, with extraordinary patience, from the very first episode. The theories exist because some people watch Springfield and refuse to accept the surface. They looked at the three-eyed fish and asked about the river. They looked at the glowing man in the woods and asked about the plant. They looked at Homer's impossible survivals and his absurd job title and his catastrophic cognitive profile, and they asked whether all of this was really coincidence. They looked at Maggie's watchful silence and understood that something was looking back. What those people found, and what we have spent several hours exploring, is a show that is stranger and sadder and more beautiful than the one that plays on Sunday nights. A show in which Homer's stupidity is a scar left by forces that broke his family before he was old enough to understand what was happening. A show in which Maggie's silence is the most rational response available to the most capable mind in the building. A show in which Burns's immortality is the logical conclusion of unchecked power across an unlimited timeline. A show in which Marge's patience is the foundation that keeps a structure standing that should have fallen decades ago. A show in which Bart's rebellion is diagnosis rather than delinquency. A show in which Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and profoundly alone, keeps asking questions that no one around her wants to answer, because she is the only character who has not stopped looking. That is The Simpsons. 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes, the longest-running animated series in American history, the most analyzed and theorized piece of popular media the medium has ever produced. After all of it, after all the theories and the evidence and the hours spent trying to understand what is actually happening behind the yellow skin and the bulging eyes and the floating timeline and the glowing plant on the hill, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why cannot we let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Springfield is our town. Maybe because Homer is our father and Marge is our mother and Bart is who we wanted to be when we were 10 years old, and the world was still simple enough for rebellion to feel like freedom. And Lisa is who we should have been, who we still might be if we could find the courage to keep asking the uncomfortable questions. And Maggie is the part of us that went quiet a long time ago, watching everything, waiting for the right moment, holding something enormous behind an expression that nobody around us has thought to examine too carefully. Or maybe it is simpler than that. Maybe we cannot let them go because letting them go means admitting that 36 years passed while we were watching, that we are different now from the people who sat down for the first episode, that the world has changed in ways we did not fully choose. And as long as The Simpsons is on, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8, and Homer is stumbling through the door and the family is there, on the couch, intact, we do not have to fully admit any of that. We can sit down, we can go home, we can watch the loop run one more time. Springfield will be there when we come back. It always is. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Number. Section 13. The Simpsons family. As a diagnostic document, what each character reveals about the system they live in. There is a way of watching The Simpsons that treats it as a collection of individual episodes about a specific fictional family in a specific fictional town. And then there is the way of watching it that we have been practicing throughout this video, which treats it as a sustained diagnostic document about the conditions under which ordinary people live, fail, survive, and occasionally flourish in a system that was not built with their well-being as the primary design consideration. Under the first reading, the show is 36 years of comedy. Under the second, it is one of the most sustained and detailed portraits of American institutional life ever committed to the animated medium. Each character in the Simpson family is not just a character. Each of them is a specific way of responding to the conditions of Springfield. Each of them has developed, through the pressures and the exposures and the losses and the adaptations of their specific history, a characteristic strategy for surviving in an environment that is not designed for their survival. And when you map those strategies against each other, the picture that emerges is not a family portrait, it is a diagnostic. A document about what people do when the world around them is broken in specific ways, and they have to find ways to keep going inside it anyway. Homer's strategy is the most discussed and the most apparent, but it is also the most misunderstood. The common reading of Homer is that he has no strategy, that he is just a man stumbling through a life he barely comprehends, surviving through luck and the narrative protection of being the main character. But under the frameworks we have been building, Homer's approach to Springfield is not random. It is specifically calibrated to the conditions the town creates. Homer has learned, through a lifetime of experience in a damaged environment with compromised tools, that the most sustainable way to live in Springfield is to not see it clearly. The fog is not a failure. The fog is a solution. A solution to the problem of being a man with Homer's history in a town with Springfield's conditions, doing Homer's job. The fog keeps him functional. Intelligent Homer, crayon-removed Homer, was miserable in a way that cognitively impaired Homer is not. The system broke Homer in ways that make him easier to manage. And Homer's response to being broken is not to fight it, it is to find a way to live inside the break. His genuine warmth, his love for his family, his stubborn capacity to keep showing up, none of that requires the clarity that the fog removes. He can love his family from inside the fog. He can come home from inside the fog. He can laugh from inside the fog. And that is, under the conditions Springfield provides, enough. Marge's strategy is patience as infrastructure. This is a more complex and harder thing than it looks from the outside. Patience, as Marge practices it, is not passivity. It is not the absence of awareness or the presence of contentment. Marge sees what is happening in Springfield more clearly than Homer does. She recognizes the dysfunction of the family around her, the inadequacy of the institutions that surround it, the specific ways that the town keeps failing the people who live in it. She does not have Homer's cognitive fog to protect her. She sees it. And she has chosen, as her response to seeing it, to hold, to not let the structure fall, to maintain the conditions under which her children have a chance, and her husband has a home, and the family has a center. This is not weakness. It is the hardest kind of strength, the kind that does not announce itself, that does not receive recognition, that simply continues to perform the function it performs, because the alternative is the collapse of everything that depends on it. Bart's strategy is disruption as sanity. The reading of Bart as simply a troublemaker, a delinquent, a poorly socialized child who has not learned the rules, misses what the show has established about why Bart is the way he is, and what his behavior actually represents within the system he inhabits. Bart grew up in Springfield. He attends Springfield Elementary. He lives beneath the cooling towers and drinks the water and breathes the air. He is surrounded by the same institutional failures and the same cultural dysfunction and the same collective denial that everyone else in Springfield is surrounded by. And his response to this environment is the response of a person who recognizes, on some level that may not be articulate but is nonetheless real, that the rules of the system he is living in are not legitimate, that the authority figures demanding his compliance have not earned that compliance through any demonstrated competence or integrity, that the structures asking him to behave are not structures organized around values worth behaving for. His disruption is not nihilism. It is a correct reading of the legitimacy of the structures he is disrupting, expressed through the only vocabulary available to a 10-year-old who has not yet developed the abstract language to articulate what he senses. Lisa's strategy is the costliest and the most admirable, and in many ways the most futile. Lisa sees everything clearly. She has the intelligence to understand what is happening in Springfield, the emotional sensitivity to register what it costs the people around her, and the moral seriousness to keep demanding better regardless of how consistently the demand is denied. She is 8 years old, and she has correctly identified the most significant problems facing her family, her school, her community, and in many episodes her country and her planet. She speaks about these things. She advocates. She challenges. She refuses to stop asking the questions that everyone around her would prefer she stop asking. And the cost of this is profound and sustained. She is isolated. She is dismissed. She is frequently punished for the accuracy of her observations by the authority figures whose inadequacy the observations expose. She keeps going anyway. Lisa's strategy is refusing to adapt to conditions that do not deserve adaptation, refusing to perform contentment with circumstances that are not contented, refusing to stop seeing clearly even when clear seeing produces nothing but loneliness. It is the most heroic thing anyone in Springfield does, and the show depicts it with enough honesty to acknowledge that heroism of that kind, in conditions like Springfield's, does not produce rewards. It produces isolation and the specific endurance required to keep choosing it regardless. Maggie, as we established in Section 5, has chosen the strategy of strategic invisibility. Of all the family members' responses to Springfield, Maggie's is the one that seems most likely to survive contact with the actual conditions of the town in the long term. Lisa's strategy is heroic but costly. Homer's strategy is sustainable but diminishing. Bart's strategy is accurate but self-limiting. Marge's strategy is essential but exhausting. Maggie's strategy, watch everything, reveal nothing, wait for the optimal moment, is the only one that does not have an obvious structural weakness built into it. The question is not whether Maggie's strategy will eventually succeed at whatever objective she is pursuing. The question is what that objective actually is. And the show, 36 years in, still has not told us. Now extend this analysis beyond the immediate family. Every significant recurring character in Springfield is a specific adaptation to the same conditions. Ned Flanders, as we explored in Section 11, is what happens when behavioral modification is applied to a child who has not been given the opportunity to develop authentic responses to the world around him. The resulting adult is a person whose goodness is real in its effects, but artificial in its origins, who can absorb extraordinary amounts of adversity through programmed patience, and who exists in a state of profound dissociation from the authentic emotional responses that the adversity would naturally produce. The kindness is genuine in the sense that it generates genuinely kind outcomes, but it is not freely chosen, it is installed. Mo Sislak is a man whose entire emotional landscape is organized around the absence of love and the certainty that love is unavailable to him. His bar, his regulars, his occasional moments of genuine human connection, all of them exist against a backdrop of sustained, deeply felt loneliness that the show depicts with more honesty than it typically gets credit for. Mo is not played entirely for laughs. Mo is played as a man who is genuinely suffering in a specific and recognizable way, and who has organized his entire social existence around a space that provides the closest available approximation of community that his particular emotional profile allows him to access. The bar is not a setting. The bar is Mo's survival mechanism, the way Homer's fog is Homer's survival mechanism and Marge's patience is hers. Chief Wiggum is a man who has found his level in Springfield's institutional ecosystem, a level that is exactly low enough to be comfortable and exactly connected enough to Burns's patronage network to be secure. His incompetence is not random, it is calibrated. He is incompetent at the things that would create problems for the powerful, and minimally competent at the things that sustain his own position. This is not a deliberate strategy in the sense of being consciously designed, but it is an adaptation, shaped by the incentives of Springfield's institutional environment to the specific conditions that environment creates. The system rewards Wiggum's kind of incompetence, so Wiggum's kind of incompetence persists. The pattern repeats across every significant character in Springfield. Each of them is a specific adaptation to the same set of conditions. Each adaptation makes sense as a response to those conditions, even when the adaptation itself is damaging or limiting or simply tragic. The characters are not eccentric for eccentricity's sake. They are people whose characters have been shaped by a specific environment, and their apparent eccentricities are the visible expressions of the adaptive responses they developed under the pressures that environment created. This is what makes The Simpsons genuinely literary in a way that most television, animated or otherwise, is not. The characters are not just funny, they are coherent. Their strangeness has reasons. The show has spent 36 years establishing those reasons with enough consistency that, taken together, they constitute a complete and internally consistent picture of a specific kind of community and the specific kinds of people it produces. The theories we have been exploring are the attempt to name the conditions that produce these adaptations. The radiation, the institutional corruption, the collective denial, the single powerful figure at the center of everything. These are the conditions. The characters are the adaptations. And together the conditions and the adaptations constitute the portrait. The portrait is not flattering. Springfield is not a good place to live, by most measurable criteria. Its residents are physically mutated, cognitively compromised, institutionally abandoned, and culturally conditioned to deny all of these facts in the service of maintaining a comfortable fiction about the normalcy of their situation. They are, in the most technical sense, victims of a system designed to exploit them. And yet, the show is also somehow warm, genuinely warm, in a way that the bleakness of the systematic reading does not fully account for. Because underneath the conditions and the adaptations and the institutional failures and the billionaire's endless winning underneath all of it, the family is real. The love is real. Homer's love for Marge is real. Marge's love for her children is real. Bart's loyalty to his family, expressed through the particular language of a 10-year-old who expresses love through pranks and occasional genuine tenderness, is real. Lisa's hope, sustained across 3 decades of evidence that hope is not warranted, is real. And Maggie's quiet watchfulness over the family that she has chosen, apparently, to protect through strategic invisibility rather than visible intervention, that is real too. The system broke these people, and they love each other anyway. Inside the break, inside the fog, inside the programmed patience and the strategic silence, and the stubborn refusal to stop asking better questions than the world around them is willing to answer. They love each other. That is the thing the theories cannot fully account for. The warmth, the genuine, slightly battered, completely unearned warmth of a family that should not still be standing, and is still standing regardless, every Sunday night, on the couch, watching television together in a house that runs on electricity generated by the facility that is slowly poisoning all of them. That is the show. All of it at once. The darkness, and the warmth, and the system, and the love. 36 years of both simultaneously, without either canceling the other out? That is why we are still watching. Number, Section 14. Things the show told you once and hoped you would forget. The Simpsons has a peculiar relationship with its own revelations. Over 36 seasons, the show has periodically dropped pieces of information into episodes that, if taken seriously and followed to their logical implications, would fundamentally alter the way Springfield's reality works. These revelations appear, produce their moment of dramatic impact, and then are quietly set aside as the episode ends and the floating timeline resets. The show tells you something significant, and then relies on the audience's willingness to treat each episode as a discrete unit rather than as an installment in a continuous story. But if you refuse to forget, if you hold the revelations in memory the way the show pretends you should not need to, they accumulate into a picture that is considerably more disturbing than anything any single episode acknowledges outright. The 342 violations, established in the plant inspection episode as a specific, documented number. The show never updates this number. It never depicts the violations being addressed. It never depicts Burns being charged with the violations or the regulatory consequences that would normally follow from a federal inspection producing this result. The violations simply persist across every subsequent season as a background fact about the plant. The water is still contaminated. The violations are still there. 342. The number has not changed because the conditions have not changed, and the conditions have not changed because the show does not need them to, and Burns does not want them to, and the Springfield regulatory apparatus is not equipped to compel them to. The Biological Weapons Laboratory. Revealed in the Mona Simpson episode, Burns owned a germ warfare facility in Springfield. He was manufacturing weaponized biological agents. In the same town where Homer was growing up, the show depicts this, uses it as the catalyst for Mona's radicalization and subsequent exile, and then moves on. The existence of the biological weapons lab is never referenced again in the canonical episodes. It simply happened. Burns built a laboratory to produce biological weapons in a residential community, operated it until it was destroyed by activists, and the only consequence he experienced was identifying and pursuing the woman responsible for its destruction across 3 decades. Nobody in Springfield ever held Burns accountable for the biological weapons lab. The regulatory and law enforcement apparatus of the town, the one that cannot investigate 342 nuclear safety violations, similarly, cannot investigate the past operation of a biological weapons facility in the same community. The lab is gone because Mona's group destroyed it, not because any institution stopped it. The human skeletons in the basement, revealed in passing, never explained, never investigated. There are human bones in the basement of an active nuclear facility in Springfield. The people those bones belonged to died inside the plant. Nobody in the episode asks who they were. Nobody in any subsequent episode references them. The bones just exist, somewhere in the lower levels of the building, as unexplained evidence of something that the show clearly decided was too dark to follow to its conclusion. The deal between Abe Simpson and Mr. Burns. Revealed in a later season, Abe discovered Burns had committed a crime and used that knowledge to secure Homer's employment in perpetuity. This means Homer's 20-plus years at the plant, his entire professional identity, the economic foundation of his family's existence, is the product of a backroom deal struck between his father and the man who drove his mother into exile. This information is delivered and then the show moves on. Homer never confronts Abe about it in any sustained way. The implications of this deal that every aspect of Homer's professional life has been determined by forces acting above him without his knowledge or consent, by the same cast of characters who shaped his emotional life in equally determined ways without his awareness, are not explored. The 5% brain function loss from the coma. Established in the coma episode, Homer lost 5% of his cognitive capacity permanently. This is presented as a medical fact within the episode and then never mentioned again. It does not appear in subsequent episodes as context for Homer's behavior or as a factor in any medical situation that Homer subsequently faces. It just happened. 5% gone, and the show moved on. These are not the only examples. The show is full of them. Pieces of information delivered with apparent narrative weight and then set aside before they can change the picture in ways that would require the show to follow them somewhere uncomfortable. The floating timeline and the episodic reset make this possible. Each episode begins fresh, and the things revealed in previous episodes do not have to be carried forward unless the writers choose to carry them. But if you carry them, if you hold them and let them accumulate the way they would if Springfield were a real place rather than a television show, the picture they compose is remarkable. A town with a nuclear facility that has had 342 known safety violations for decades. A billionaire who also owned a biological weapons laboratory in the same town. Human bones in the basement of the nuclear facility that nobody has investigated. A deal between the plant owner and a current employee's parent that secured the employee's position in exchange for silence about a crime. A 5% brain function reduction in a man whose cognitive capacity was already significantly below average, working in a position with life or death implications for the surrounding community. And a medical establishment that apparently knew about a crayon lodged in the same man's brain and declined to address it. These are the things the show told you once and hoped you would forget. These are the things that, taken together, constitute the most complete version of what is actually happening in Springfield. Not the version that plays on Sunday nights. The version that plays when you hold every revelation the show has ever made side by side and refuse to look away. The show is not hiding its secrets. The floating timeline and the episodic reset are not walls built to keep you from the truth. They are the mechanisms of Springfield's own collective denial, operating at the level of the show's formal structure. Springfield forgets because the show forgets. The show forgets because Springfield forgets. And the audience forgets because the audience has been watching Springfield long enough to have learned its collective habits. But some of us are still here, still holding the pieces, still refusing to pretend that the bones in the basement are not there. And once you start holding the pieces, once you start carrying the revelations forward instead of setting them down at the episode's end, Springfield stops looking like a cartoon. It starts looking like a case file. Number, Section 15, The Legacy of 36 Years. What it means that The Simpsons is still on. The Simpsons premiered on December 17, 1989. As of this video, it has been on the air for 36 years. It has produced nearly 800 episodes. It has run longer than most of its current audience has been alive. It has outlasted every show that premiered in the same era. It has outlasted the careers of most of the people who worked on its first season. It has outlasted the cultural moments it satirized, the public figures it lampooned, the trends it tracked, the anxieties it articulated, and the institutions it mocked. It keeps going. And the fact that it keeps going is itself a piece of evidence, not just about the show's commercial viability or its institutional inertia within the Fox network scheduling, about something more fundamental, about what the show represents to the people who keep watching it and why the stopping of it would mean something beyond the cancellation of a television program. The Simpsons has been renewed for at least 2 additional seasons as of this writing. Season 37 and Season 38 are in production. This means the show will run until at least 2027, at which point it will have been broadcasting for 38 years. Bart Simpson will be 38 years old if you count from his birthday in 1989. He will be 10 years old if you count from the show's internal timeline. Both of those facts will be simultaneously true, which is the floating timeline's essential absurdity made concrete in a specific number. The show's continued production after 36 years is not primarily a statement about the quality of its current output. Most serious Simpsons fans will acknowledge that the show has not operated at the creative level of its peak seasons for some time. The Golden Age, roughly seasons 3 through 8, with some extending that window in either direction, produced a body of work that represents some of the finest television writing in the medium's history. The show at its peak was genuinely remarkable in ways that went beyond its comedy. It was psychologically precise, emotionally honest, and formally innovative in ways that its success has obscured somewhat because the things it pioneered have become so common in the medium that they no longer appear as innovations. The later seasons are a different kind of show. They are not without value and they are not without moments of genuine quality, but they operate in a different register from the peak seasons, and most observers can identify the shift without much disagreement about when it happened. And yet the show continues. It continues because it has become something beyond a television program. It has become a cultural institution, an entity that exists independent of any individual season's quality because its existence itself has become the thing that matters. The Simpsons being on is not primarily a statement about what any particular episode contains. It is a statement about the continued presence of a cultural touchstone, the continued availability of a reference point, the continued operation of a shared cultural language that several generations of Americans have in common. This is what we have been dancing around across this entire video, and it is worth saying directly. The Simpsons is still on because we need it to be on. Not any individual episode of it, not the specific creative work of any specific season, but it, the entity, the family, the house on Evergreen Terrace, the couch, the opening credits, the theme music. We need them to still be there, because as long as they are there, something is continuous. Something that we share with the people we watched the show with when we were young. Something that connects the version of ourselves that first encountered this show to the version of ourselves watching this video right now. The Simpsons is not just a show that has been on for 36 years. The Simpsons is a cultural anchor that has been holding something in place for 36 years. And the something it is holding in place is difficult to name precisely, but you would recognize it the moment it was gone. It is the feeling of being in a specific cultural moment that you share with the people around you. The feeling of a reference that everyone gets, of a joke that does not require explanation, of a world that everyone old enough to have watched television in the 1990s carries around as common ground. It is the feeling of Springfield being a place that exists, that can be visited, that will be there when you need it to be. The show's 36-year run is itself a form of the immortality we discussed when talking about Burns. The Simpsons has survived past the point where survival is primarily a function of ongoing vitality. It survives because the infrastructure of its survival, the audience investment, the cultural penetration, the institutional inertia of a show that Fox has branded and promoted across 3.5 decades has become self-sustaining in ways that do not require any individual season to justify the show's continuation. Like Burns, it is too expensive to end. Like Burns, it has built a system around its own continuation that is more durable than any specific current output would justify on its own merits. And like Burns, the people inside the system, the characters, the family, Springfield itself, continue in whatever form the current moment requires them to take. Not because of what they are doing in any particular episode, because of what they represent. Because of what their continued presence means to the people watching. The loop runs because we built it to run, and we built it to run because we needed somewhere to put the part of ourselves that does not want to admit that time passes, that circumstances change, that the family we grow up with becomes something different, as everyone in it gets older and the world around them keeps moving. As long as The Simpsons is on, Bart is still 10. As long as Bart is still 10, the show we watched at 10 is still accessible. As long as the show we watched at 10 is still accessible, the person we were at 10 is still reachable. Still continuous with the person we are now. That is why the show is still on. That is why it will be on for at least 2 more seasons and possibly more beyond that. That is why, when it finally ends, and it will end, the floating timeline will eventually land. The ending will mean more than the cancellation of any single program has any right to mean. Because it will not just be the end of The Simpsons. It will be the closing of a door that has been open since December of 1989. A door that opened onto Springfield, onto Evergreen Terrace, onto the family on the couch, together, watching television, in a house that was never really in any particular state but was always, somehow, wherever you needed it to be. That door closing will mean something. But it has not closed yet. And for now, for at least 2 more seasons, and probably longer, Springfield will still be there when you go back to it. Homer will still be stumbling through the door. Marge will still be waiting. Bart will still be 10 years old. Lisa will still be asking questions that nobody around her wants to hear. And Maggie will still be watching. Patient, silent, waiting for the right moment, as she always has been, as she always will be, until she decides she is not. Number, Section 16. The secondary characters as a shadow portrait of Springfield. Most television shows treat their secondary characters as set dressing. They exist to populate scenes, to provide the protagonist with someone to talk to deliver a punchline or absorb a consequence, and then to step back while the main story continues. Springfield does something different with its secondary cast. Over 36 seasons, the recurring characters of Springfield have accumulated enough screen time and enough canonical detail that they constitute an entire secondary layer of the show's diagnostic portrait. They are not set dressing, they are evidence. Take Sideshow Bob. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. began his career on the show as Krusty the Clown's silent sidekick. His defining characteristic, in those early appearances, was his incongruity, a man with obvious intelligence and cultural refinement performing slapstick comedy for children. The gap between what Bob obviously was and what his professional circumstances required him to be was the joke, and then the show deepened him. Bob framed Krusty for armed robbery. Bob ran for mayor on a platform of voter fraud. Bob tried to kill Bart Simpson across multiple episodes spanning the entire run of the series. Bob married a woman in a remote Italian village and attempted to murder her. Bob eventually became close enough to the Simpson family that the show found ways to collaborate with him while maintaining the running gag of his murderous intent toward Bart. What Bob represents in the show's larger portrait is the character of genuine talent destroyed by circumstance and redirected into pathology. Bob is brilliant. The show has established his intelligence repeatedly and without ambiguity. He is musically trained, broadly educated, culturally sophisticated in ways that place him entirely outside the normal range of Springfield residents. And he has spent his adult life trapped in a town that has no use for what he is and no capacity to appreciate what he offers, expressing his gifts in the only available direction the system has left open to him, which is elaborate, opera-quoting villainy. Bob is what happens when real ability encounters a system that cannot accommodate it and has no interest in trying. His murderous obsession with Bart is not simply a character trait. It is the natural endpoint of a man whose legitimate aspirations were consistently denied, and who eventually redirected the energy of those aspirations into the only project the system allowed him to pursue with the full application of his capabilities. Burns channels intelligence into exploitation. Lisa channels intelligence into feudal advocacy. Bob channels intelligence into Baroque revenge fantasies. Each of them is applying the same resource to the conditions the same town created and arriving at different specific outcomes through different personal variables. Now look at Comic Book Guy. Jeff Albertson, the proprietor of the Android's Dungeon, he is presented as a comedic type, the archetype of the obsessive nerd, the collector whose encyclopedic knowledge of his particular domain is matched only by his contempt for those who lack it. He is, on the surface, a figure of gentle mockery, but the canonical facts the show has established about him are darker than the comedic presentation suggests. He is deeply lonely. He is profoundly unhappy with his life, despite having organized it entirely around his interests. He has enough intelligence to be aware of his own unhappiness and enough self-knowledge to recognize that the defense mechanisms he has built around himself, the contempt, the encyclopedic expertise deployed as social armor, the retreat into the mastery of a domain where real life cannot reach him, are not solving the underlying problem. They are just making it bearable. Comic Book Guy is Springfield's clearest portrait of a particular kind of adaptation to isolation. When belonging is unavailable, some people retreat into the mastery of a domain where they can be the undisputed expert, where competence creates a substitute for connection, where the encyclopedic knowledge they have accumulated becomes the thing that defines them, rather than the absence of everything else they wanted. He is not a joke. He is a person who found the most sustainable way he could find to live inside a situation that was not what he wanted, and the show has enough integrity to let his sadness show through the comedy often enough that the picture of him is complete rather than merely satirical. Otto Mann, the school bus driver. Chronically intoxicated, clearly decades behind the professional standard his position theoretically requires, maintaining custody over Springfield's children through their daily commute in a state that would disqualify him from operating a vehicle in any regulatory environment that was functioning as designed. Otto is another data point in the institutional failure argument. He exists in his role because the institution that employs him, Springfield Elementary, does not have the budget, the oversight infrastructure, or the administrative competence to evaluate the fitness of its bus driver with any rigor. He gets the kids to school, most of the time. The bar for institutional adequacy in Springfield is low enough that most of the time is sufficient. But Otto also represents something else in the show's portrait. He is a man who found his niche and stayed in it, not through ambition or design, but through a combination of genuine personal qualities. He is kind, he is loyal, he is genuinely fond of the children in his charge, and the specific conditions of the environment he operates in, which do not demand more from him than he is capable of providing. In a functioning system, Otto would not be driving a school bus. In Springfield, Otto driving the school bus is one of the more functional outcomes the institutional environment produces. He cares about the kids. He shows up. In Springfield, these things are enough. Apu Nahasapi Mapedalon ran the Quickie Mart for the majority of the show's run. Whatever legitimate criticisms have been raised about the show's handling of his character over the years, the canonical portrait of Apu, as established in the best episodes of the series, is of a man with a PhD in computer science from a prestigious university, running a convenience store in a town that has no outlet for his actual capabilities, working absurdly long hours for an economic return that does not reflect his qualifications, raising a family under conditions that the town's institutional environment makes harder than it needs to be, and maintaining throughout all of it a dignity and a warmth that the show treats with genuine respect. Apu is overqualified for the role Springfield has given him and underserved by the environment he inhabits, and the show knows this and depicts it honestly without resolving it, because the resolution would require Springfield to be a different kind of town than it is. Dr. Julius Hibbert, the Simpson family physician, presented consistently as competent by Springfield standards, which means competent enough to manage the basic medical requirements of characters the narrative needs to survive, while incompetent enough not to notice the things the narrative needs to remain unnoticed. Hibbert laughed at the revelation that Homer had a crayon in his brain. This is the show's single clearest depiction of the medical establishment's relationship to Homer's specific condition. The appropriate response to discovering that a patient has had a foreign object lodged in their brain for decades, a foreign object that a review of their medical records would have revealed opportunities to detect, is not laughter. The laughter is the show telling you what Hibbert is and what the medical establishment he represents is. It is an institution that has calibrated its responses to the conditions of Springfield rather than to any external standard of professional practice. Each of these secondary characters is doing what the primary characters are doing, finding a way to survive or to function or simply to persist inside conditions that were not designed for their flourishing. Some of them manage more than persistence, Apu's warmth, Otto's loyalty, even Bob's Baroque intelligence, but none of them fully escape the system. None of them are allowed to. The system is the constant, the adaptations are the variable. And the range of adaptations the show has documented across 36 seasons and a cast of secondary characters that would fill a small town on their own is the most complete picture of a specific kind of community that the animated medium has ever produced. Springfield is not just Homer's story, it is everyone's story. Every person who lives there, significant or secondary, named or background, has been shaped by the same conditions in their own specific way. And the accumulation of all those shapings, the full portrait of everyone the town has made, is the show's real subject. The Simpsons is not about a family, it is about a town. The family is just the window through which we see the town most clearly. Number section 17. The show within the show, meta moments that break the frame. The Simpsons has a long history of breaking the fourth wall. Not just the gentle winks that most comedies deploy the aside to camera, the knowing reference to the show's own format, but genuine structural self-awareness that goes deeper than a quick joke and touches something more unsettling about the nature of what the show is and what it is doing. The most famous example is the episode Treehouse of Horror 6, which features a segment called Homer Cubed. In this segment, Homer discovers a portal into a three-dimensional space, a CGI environment that the two-dimensional Springfield cannot accommodate, and enters it, becoming a fully rendered three-dimensional figure, moving through a space that operates according to different physical laws than the one he normally inhabits. The episode uses this premise for comedy, as it uses everything. But the implications are genuinely strange. Homer, moving into the three-dimensional space, becomes more physically real, more detailed, more volumetrically present than the two-dimensional version of himself that normally exists. The more real version of Homer exists in a space that Springfield cannot reach. He has moved into a dimension that his home cannot access. And the episode ends with Homer falling out of the three-dimensional space entirely, landing in live-action reality on an actual street, in the actual world, rendered in live-action footage, confused and alone. This is a comedy bit. It is also, under the frameworks we have been building, a metaphor for the most unsettling implication of the coma theory. If Homer's Springfield is a dream, then the real Homer, the three-dimensional, volumetrically present, actually existing Homer, is somewhere that the Springfield of the show cannot reach. The more real version of Homer exists outside the frame. And the end of the segment, in which Homer lands in live-action reality, confused and alone, is a depiction of what would happen if Homer's dreaming brain ever produced a version of reality that was real enough to crack through to the actual world on the other side of the hospital room window. The mockumentary episode, Behind the Laughter, is another profound structural disruption. The episode presents the Simpson family as a real family who starred in a television show called The Simpsons, and follows the format of a VH1 behind-the-music-style documentary to examine their rise to fame, their creative conflicts, their personal crises, and their eventual reconciliation and return to television. The joke is that the characters who normally exist as fictional creations are being presented as real people who played fictional versions of themselves in a television show. The layer of reality that normally separates the characters from the audience has been collapsed. The Simpsons family is simultaneously real within the episode's frame and fictional within the show's normal frame. And the episode does not resolve this contradiction because resolving it would require committing to one reading or the other, and the show's power lies precisely in its refusal to commit. What Behind the Laughter actually establishes, if you take it seriously as canonical evidence rather than as a self-aware comedy episode, is that the relationship between Springfield's fictional reality and the real world of the audience is more porous and less stable than the normal presentation of the show suggests. The characters know they are on television. They have been aware of their own fictionality on multiple occasions, and yet they continue to exist, to behave as though their fictional lives are real, to feel things and want things and lose things within the framework of their fictional existence. The awareness of fictionality does not cancel the reality of the experience from within the fiction. Springfield knows it is Springfield. The family knows it is the family, and they keep going anyway. This is, unexpectedly, the most emotionally resonant version of the coma theory. If Homer is dreaming, if he is aware, at some level, that his Springfield is a constructed reality rather than a waking one, then his continuation of the dream, despite that awareness, is not denial. It is choice. He knows the family is not real in the way the real world is real. He knows the Springfield on the other side of his eyelids is an approximation assembled from memory and longing and the ambient sounds of a hospital room. He knows, and he keeps dreaming anyway, because the dream is better than the alternative. Because inside the dream, even with the knowledge of its constructed nature, the family is present and the beer is cold and the house is the same and nobody has to leave yet. The show within the show, in all its forms, is the show telling you something about the nature of its own existence that it cannot say directly. The Springfield that plays on Sunday nights is a construction. The characters know it, the writers know it, the audience knows it. And none of that knowledge changes the fact that the construction contains something real. The warmth is real, the love is real. The specific kind of recognition that happens when you see something in Springfield that you have seen in your own life, that recognition is real, and it does not stop being real because the frame around it is fictional. The Simpsons has survived 36 years, not because the frame is real, but because what is inside the frame is real enough, true enough, honest enough about the specific texture of a specific kind of American life that the people watching it recognize themselves in it, even knowing they are watching a cartoon family with yellow skin and 4 fingers living in an impossible town that does not appear on any map. The meta moments, the fourth wall breaks, the mockumentaries, the 3-dimensional excursions, the leaked fake deleted scenes referencing the coma theory, the alternate endings for the Burns shooting. All of it are the show acknowledging, in the only language available to it, the strangeness of its own situation. 36 years old and still going. A construction that has outlasted most of the real things around it. A fictional family more durable than most real ones. A fictional town more consistently inhabited than most real ones. What do you do with that? How do you acknowledge the strangeness of still being here after all this time, still running, still producing new episodes, still sitting across from an audience that has been watching long enough to have grown up watching you? You break the frame occasionally. You let the characters look directly at the camera. You do a mockumentary episode. You acknowledge the theories. You animate the fake deleted scene. You let the show touch the weirdness of its own continued existence, just enough to indicate that it knows the weirdness is there, and then you return to the couch, and the couch gag, and the theme music, and you do it again next week. Because the loop runs, as it has always run, as it always will, until it does not. Number section 18. The final reckoning. Every theory applied to a single moment. There is one scene in the entire run of The Simpsons that every theory we have discussed applies to simultaneously. One moment where the radiation theory, the coma theory, the Burns conspiracy, the institutional failure, the floating timeline, the collective denial, and the family's love all converge into a single image. The scene is simple. It happens at the end of dozens of episodes. The family is on the couch together. The television is on. The day is over. Whatever catastrophe the episode involved has resolved, or been set aside, or been forgotten in the way Springfield forgets things. And the family is just there, together, on the couch, in the same position they were in at the start of the episode, watching television. Apply the radiation theory to this image. These are people whose bodies have been mutated by decades of exposure to the contamination from a nuclear facility, operating with 342 known violations. Their yellow skin, their 4 fingers, their bulging eyes, all of it, the visible signature of what the plant has done to them. And they are sitting in a house that runs on electricity generated by the facility that mutated them, watching a television powered by the same source, comfortable, together, unaware of or unable to act on the conditions that produce the life they are living. Apply the coma theory to this image. This is Homer's deepest wish, rendered in visual form. The family together, intact, no one missing, no one grown up, no one gone. The moment he wants most to hold on to, and the moment his dreaming mind returns to at the end of every episode, because returning to it is the whole point of the dream. The couch is not just furniture. It is the image of everything Homer is fighting to maintain in his unconscious state. The family, together, on the couch, safe. Apply the Burns conspiracy to this image. This family sits here because Burns has arranged for them to sit here. Homer's job, which paid for the couch and the house and the television, was secured through a backroom deal between Burns and Abe. Homer's continued employment, regardless of his 3 documented errors and his impossible incompetence, is contractually guaranteed by the same agreement. The warmth of the family scene is real, and it exists inside a framework that Burns constructed and controls. Apply the institutional failure argument to this image. The family is safe tonight. The episode's crisis has been resolved. And the institutions that should ensure they remain safe, the plant's safety oversight, the town's regulatory apparatus, the police department, the hospital, the courts have all failed in their basic functions today as they fail every day. The family's safety tonight is not the product of institutional protection. It is the product of narrative resolution. The story ended, and so they are fine. Tomorrow the story will start again, and the institutional failures will continue, and the safety will again be a function of the story ending before the consequences catch up. Apply the floating timeline to this image. The family is on the couch in whatever year this episode airs. They are also on the couch in every year the show has ever aired. They are simultaneously in 1989 and in 2025 and in every year between. And they look exactly the same in all of them. The couch is not just a piece of furniture in the Springfield living room. It is the fixed point of the floating timeline, the thing that does not move, while everything around it, the cultural references, the technology, the guest stars, the political landscape keeps updating. The couch is the anchor of the floating present. The family on the couch is the image of permanence that the floating timeline requires. Apply the collective denial argument to this image. The family is on the couch because they have chosen not to look at what surrounds them. The cracked cooling towers are visible from their street. The contaminated water flows from their taps. The institutional failures that govern their lives are ongoing and unaddressed. And the family is on the couch, watching television, not because they do not sense something is wrong, but because sensing something is wrong and sitting on the couch anyway is the specific coping mechanism that Springfield produces in its residents. The couch is not comfort. The couch is the place where Springfield's collective denial becomes individual and domestic, where the community's choice to not acknowledge becomes a family's choice to not acknowledge, enacted in the most ordinary possible setting. And then set all the theories aside. Look at the image without them. The family on the couch together, Homer and Marge, Bart and Lisa and Maggie. The specific configuration of 5 specific people who belong to each other in the specific way that families belong to each other. Not because they chose each other, but because they are each other's. The unconditional, unreasonable, entirely irrational love of people who are stuck with each other in the best possible sense of the phrase. Stuck with each other through the Springfield water and the nuclear plant, and the floating timeline, and the institutional failures, and the billionaire's 100-year grudge, and the coma, and the theories, and the 36 years, and all the rest of it. Still on the couch, still together. This is the image that the show has been returning to for 36 years. Not because it is the most dramatic image or the most sophisticated image or the image that best serves whatever theory you are currently applying to the show's long history, but because it is the truest image, the most irreducible thing the show has to say, after everything. After all the mysteries and the evidence and the dark implications and the systems and the loops, the family is on the couch, together. That is the show. Everything else is the context in which that happens. The context is dark and strange and getting stranger with each passing season, and the theories we have spent this video exploring are the attempt to map the darkness accurately. But the image at the center of all that darkness is simple, and it is warm, and it does not require a theory to explain it. It just requires a family. On a couch, in a house that should not be standing and is standing regardless. In a town that should not exist and exists anyway. At the end of an episode that resolved the crisis and reset the clock and started the couch gag again, as it always does. As it always will. Number, Section 19. Things we still do not know, the open questions Springfield has never answered. After 36 seasons, the mysteries that remain unsolved are as interesting as the ones we have spent this video examining. Because the questions the show has refused to answer are not random. They follow a pattern. And the pattern tells you something about the show's understanding of what it is and what it is doing. Who were the people whose skeletons were found in the basement of the nuclear plant? The show introduced this detail in a safety inspection episode and never returned to it. Human remains inside an operating nuclear facility represent, in any functioning regulatory environment, a serious investigative matter. Springfield's regulatory environment is not functioning, as we have established at length. But the show's refusal to answer this question is not just an institutional failure within the fictional world. It is a creative choice about what the show is willing to follow to a conclusion. The bones are there. The show knows they are there. It put them there. And it has chosen, across 30-plus subsequent seasons, not to explain them. This is not an oversight. It is a deliberate decision to leave the darkest implication of the nuclear plant's history unaddressed. To leave it in the basement, literally, where it exists as a permanent background fact that no one in Springfield is able or willing to confront. What does Maggie's second word turn out to be? The show established that Maggie's first word was daddy, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in an episode that treated the moment with genuine emotional weight. Since then, Maggie has not developed language in any meaningful way across 3 decades of canonical time. She has had moments of sound here, an expression there, but nothing that constitutes a second word in the way the first one did. The show knows this question exists. It knows the audience is waiting, and it has chosen, consistently and deliberately, to not answer it. Because the moment Maggie speaks, something changes. The silence that has been her defining characteristic, her strategic armor, her source of power within the family and within Springfield, is broken. Whatever she says will define what she has been holding all this time. Whatever she says will tell us what Maggie actually is. And the show has decided, apparently, that what Maggie actually is should remain unknown. For now. For as long as the loop runs. What did Burns' deal with Abe Simpson actually cover? We know that Abe discovered Burns had committed a crime and used that knowledge to secure Homer's employment. We do not know what the crime was. The show has gestured at this without making it explicit, which means the specific nature of Burns' transgression and the specific leverage Abe held over him remain in the territory of implication rather than canonical fact. The deal exists. The crime exists. Its nature does not. Where does Smithers actually stand? The show has spent 36 seasons depicting Smithers' devotion to Burns in ways that range from comedic exaggeration to something more genuinely ambivalent and dark. Smithers is aware of what Burns is. He is not unaware of Burns' cruelty, his exploitation of Springfield, his willingness to harm the people around him in service of his own interests. And Smithers stays. He stays because of his devotion to Burns, which the show depicts as genuine and complicated and not reducible to simple loyalty or simple pathology. But the show has never fully answered the question of whether Smithers is staying because he chooses to or because the leaving is no longer possible because his life has been so thoroughly organized around Burns' management that his own identity outside of that role has atrophied past the point of recovery. The show keeps this question open. It is one of the more interesting open questions in the entire series. And finally, what happens to Springfield? Not in any individual episode. What is the long-term trajectory of the town? If you remove the floating timeline and the episodic reset and imagine Springfield as a real place existing in real time, the contamination continues. The violations are never addressed. The population's cognitive impairment deepens with each successive generation raised in the same conditions. Burns continues. The institutional failures continue. The collective denial continues. Without the interventions of the floating timeline, without the reset button and the narrative resolution and the couch at the end of every episode, what does Springfield become? The show will not answer this. It cannot answer it without ending. But the question is there, underneath everything, as the show's most honest acknowledgement of what it has spent 36 years depicting. A system that does not change. A contamination that does not stop. A man who does not die. A family that does not age. And the accumulated consequence of all of it, building across the years, never reaching the resolution that real consequences eventually produce. Springfield will not save itself. The show has established this comprehensively. The radiation will not stop. Burns will not be held accountable. The institutions will not be reformed. The denial will not break. Unless something changes that the show cannot currently imagine, unless Maggie speaks, unless the dream ends, unless the loop, finally, after 36 years and nearly 800 episodes and everything that has accumulated inside it, stops. And something new begins. We do not know what that would look like. Springfield does not know. The show does not know. But somewhere inside the loop, inside the coma, inside the contamination zone and the floating timeline and the couch at the end of the episode, the possibility exists. It has always existed. And as long as the possibility exists, there is a reason to keep watching. To keep asking the questions that Springfield cannot answer. To keep looking at the three-eyed fish and refusing to accept that this is just how things are around here. Because someone has to ask. And if not us, watching from outside the loop with the clarity the characters inside it cannot access, then who? The show runs. The questions stay open. And we keep watching. Because that is what we do. In Springfield, which is everywhere, which is home. Number. Section 20. The voice behind the curtain. What the writers knew and when they knew it. One of the most interesting questions you can ask about The Simpsons is not what the show means, but what the people who made it intended it to mean, and how much of what it means was ever intentional in the first place. Because the show's meaning has accumulated in ways that almost certainly exceed anything its original creative team sat down and planned. The theories we have been exploring are not, for the most part, the product of deliberate authorial design. They are the product of a team of extremely intelligent people working at high speed across an enormous number of episodes, producing content that was individually designed for comedy and immediate emotional impact, not for the slow accumulation of a coherent mythology. And yet the mythology accumulated anyway. This is the most interesting thing about the theories, in the end. Not that the writers planted clues or embedded secret messages or designed the radiation theory as a coherent explanatory framework for the show's physical anomalies, but that the show's internal consistency, the shared understanding among its writers about who these characters were and how this town worked and what its institutions looked like and what its social dynamics produced was robust enough that patterns emerged from the accumulated work that no individual writer was tracking. The coma theory was not designed. Nobody on the writing staff sat down in 1993 and decided that the April Fool's episode would serve as the hinge point of a coherent theory about the nature of the show's reality. But the coma episode happened. The tonal shift happened. The aging freeze was already in place. The celebrity appearances were already accumulating. And when a Reddit user named Hard Topic A Name looked at all of it together and proposed the theory, it held together with an elegance that the show's creators acknowledged even in their denial of it. Al Jean did not dismiss it as incoherent. He dismissed it as untrue. There is a difference. A theory can be internally consistent and externally false, and the coma theory is an example of exactly that. It is coherent. It is supported by genuine canonical evidence. It is not what the writers intended, and it does not need to be. The best theories about long-running works of popular culture are often not the ones the authors intended. They are the ones that emerge from the work's internal logic operating across enough material to produce patterns that exceed any individual authorial intention. The radiation theory occupies a more interesting middle ground. The show clearly intended the nuclear plant to be a source of comedy, of satire, of dark implication. It clearly intended Blinky, the three-eyed fish, to be a statement about environmental contamination. It clearly intended the safety violations and Burns's corruption and Homer's impossible job performance to operate as satirical observations about industrial negligence and regulatory failure. What is less clear is whether the writers ever looked at all of these elements together and thought, this adds up to a coherent explanation for the show's physical anomalies. Whether anyone ever sat in a writer's room and said, the reason all the characters have yellow skin and 4 fingers and bulging eyes is that the nuclear plant has mutated the entire population? Probably not. But the elements that support that conclusion were placed in the show deliberately, and the conclusion emerges from them coherently. And that is the interesting thing. The show knew more than any individual writer did. The accumulated work contained more meaning than any individual episode was designed to produce. This is what happens when intelligent people work in the same creative space across a long enough time period with a consistent enough shared understanding of their material. The shared understanding generates patterns. The patterns generate meaning. The meaning exceeds any individual intention, and the audience, given enough time and enough episodes to work with, finds the meaning that the work contains, regardless of whether any individual author put it there deliberately. This is why the theories are worth taking seriously even though the showrunners deny them. Not because the denial is dishonest. Al Jean is not lying when he says the coma theory is not true. He is accurately reporting that it was not the writer's intention. But intention is not the only source of meaning in a long-running work. Accumulated internal logic is also a source of meaning. Pattern is also a source of meaning. And the theories are the audience's attempt to name the meaning that the show's accumulated internal logic has produced, independent of any single writer's deliberate design. The show made Springfield. Springfield made the theories. The theories revealed what Springfield had always been, beneath the jokes and the couch gags and the 36 years of Sunday nights. Not because anyone planned it that way, because that is what coherent creative work does across a long enough timeline. It becomes more than what it was designed to be. It becomes what it had to be, given everything that went into it. The Simpsons is, in the end, the product of an enormous number of individual creative decisions made across an enormous period of time by an enormous number of people who shared a common enough understanding of their material to produce something that exceeds the sum of its parts. The theories are the evidence of that excess, the proof that the show contained more than it knew. The demonstration that Springfield was always stranger, darker, more internally consistent, and more emotionally true than any single episode of it required it to be. That is the final mystery of The Simpsons. Not who shot Burns, not where Springfield is, not whether Homer is dreaming. The final mystery is how a television show produced under commercial constraints by a rotating cast of writers working at speed across 36 seasons managed to accumulate a fictional world coherent enough to support the kind of sustained theoretical attention that this video has spent several hours giving it. The answer, probably, is barely. By the thinnest possible margin. Through the specific intelligence of specific writers at specific moments in the show's history. Through the coherence of a small set of core characters whose internal logic was established precisely enough in the early seasons to generate consistent behavior across everything that followed. Through the rigorous consistency of a small set of recurring elements, the plant, Burns, Homer's job, the family's economic situation, the institutional failures that gave the show's accumulated material enough structural coherence to support the patterns the theories identify. Barely. But enough. Enough to make Springfield real in the ways that matter. Enough to make the family true in the ways that last. Enough to make the theories feel like discovery rather than invention. Like finding something that was there rather than placing something that was not. Enough to bring you here, watching this video, spending several hours in a town that does not appear on any map, asking questions about a family that does not exist, taking seriously the implications of a cartoon nuclear plant that has been leaking into a cartoon water supply for 36 years. Enough to make it matter. And that, in the end, is all any story can ask for. That it matters. That someone, somewhere, takes it seriously enough to ask what it means. That the loop keeps running because the people inside it are worth understanding. The Simpsons matters. After 36 years, after everything, it still matters. And it will keep mattering for as long as one person looks at a three-eyed fish and refuses to just move on. Number afterward. A note on Springfield. Every town has a version of itself that it shows to visitors, and a version that only the people who live there actually know. The version you see driving through is the storefronts, the parks, the landmarks. The version the residents know is the water pressure and the school board meetings, and the neighbor with the long memory, and the local businessman who everyone understands not to cross directly. Springfield has shown us both versions across 36 years of episodes. The comedy version is the one that plays at the surface, the couch gags, the guest stars, the sight gags, the rapid-fire jokes that made the show a phenomenon. The version underneath, the one we have been mapping in this video, is darker and more consistent and more carefully constructed than the surface version requires it to be. The people who made the show were doing both things at once. The comedy is real, the darkness is real, the warmth is real, the critique is real. None of these things cancel the others. Springfield is a place where genuinely funny things happen to genuinely damaged people living inside a genuinely broken system, and the funny things do not make the damage less real, and the damage does not make the funny things less funny. Both are true. Both have always been true. The theories are the audience's way of honoring the darker, truer version of the show, of saying, "We saw what you put in there. We noticed the bones in the basement. We tracked the contamination across seasons. We held the revelations the show dropped and hoped we would forget. We noticed the tonal shift after season 4. We looked at Maggie's watchful silence and understood that something was looking back." That noticing is a form of respect. The highest form of respect an audience can pay to a work of popular culture is to take it more seriously than its commercial context requires. To look for the meaning underneath the jokes. To refuse to accept the surface when the depth is available. The Simpsons has earned that kind of attention across 36 years and nearly 800 episodes through the accumulated weight of a fictional world that is strange enough and consistent enough and true enough to sustain it. Springfield is not real. The Simpsons family does not exist. The nuclear plant is not poisoning anyone's actual water supply. But the things the show is saying through Springfield, through the plant, through Burns and Homer and Marge and the kids and the institutions and the floating timeline and the collective denial, those things are real. They are observations about how power operates and how communities survive and how families hold together and what people do when the world around them is not what it should be and shows no sign of becoming what it should be anytime soon. Those observations are worth paying attention to. They have been worth paying attention to for 36 years. They will keep being worth paying attention to for as long as the show runs, and as long as people care enough to look for what is underneath the jokes. Which, if the history of the audience's relationship to this show is any guide, will be for a very long time. That is Springfield. That is the show that has been running since December of 1989. The show that produced Blinky, the three-eyed fish, and the bones in the basement, and the glowing man in the woods, and the coma, and the shooting, and the immortal billionaire, and the silent genius in the high chair, and the mother who vanished in the night, and the town that made it illegal to tell. The truth. The show that has been telling you something true about something real, through jokes and couch gags and celebrity cameos and annual Halloween specials, for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. You now have the full picture. Every theory, every piece of evidence, every open question, every moment where the show told you something important and trusted you to hold it. 36 seasons. Nearly 800 episodes. One town, one family. On the couch. Together. As they have always been. As they always will be. Until the loop finally stops. Which it has not done yet. And so we wait, we watch, we come back next Sunday. Because Springfield is there. And as long as Springfield is there, so are we. Good night.